Hey everyone, and welcome to my guide on the Frosthaven Drifter character. A character that I think a lot of people are going to immediately gravitate towards because it has a lot of themes of what the traditional kind of Gloomhaven characters did. So if you come from that perspective, it's got a lot of familiarity in the mechanics that it has, but also it's a very jack of all trades character. It's got access to lots of different types of abilities, can really fit a very hybrid role in your party. It can really do a lot of different things and can be played in a couple of different ways. So let's go check it out, because I think this one will end up being probably quite a fan favorite from the starters. Before we get started, a big thank you to all of my supporters over on Patreon, and of course people who sub over on Twitch. I really appreciate it. Thank you especially to Obi-Wan Kanzi and Mike Kira for the legendary support over on Patreon. I really appreciate it. And if you would like to hang out with me live, then come over to twitch.tv/ManageRequests, where I stream Frosthaven for a lot of the time, but also some other games too, so come hang out. Okay then, without further ado, let's crack into the Drifter. So as you can see with the Drifter, we are very solid across all of the categories really, apart from that control category. Control in Frosthaven is measured in slightly different ways. We're not just talking about cards that do stun, disarm, immobilize. We're also talking about things like push, things like pull. We're talking about things that can manipulate the environment and force enemies to go in certain directions. So control is a little bit more of a wider category in Frosthaven, I would say, but this is absolutely correct. The Drifter has no access to any kind of control abilities inherently. Anything that you want to bring in control wise would have to be through items or through allies maybe supporting you in certain ways. Also, there's no elemental affinities on this character, which could be a bad thing, could be a good thing. On the good side, it means that you're not competing for any elements with anybody, but on the bad side, it means that if you are looking for a character who can maybe fuel up the elements for somebody else, the Drifter isn't going to be able to do that for you, again, without items. So the Drifter is a very nice plug and play character who can do lots of different kind of roles: a tanking role, a support role, a range damage role, a melee damage role, lots of different things you can do. But you are really weak in two particular areas, which is that control and in the element generation. The Drifter has two generally recognized builds. You have the ranged build and you have the melee build. The ranged build focusing on the ranged damage and healing support abilities, and the melee one focusing on melee damage and healing self-style abilities, with a little bit of shield maybe mixed in with the melee build, as well as a little bit of extra stuff sometimes mixed in with the ranged build. You usually find that the ranged and the melee are kind of like either ends of the spectrum, and then you may find yourself moving, somewhere along that spectrum of how you want to play this character. However, in this build, we'll be focusing more on the melee side of the character, because that is what I found to be very successful, and I think a lot of people have preferred to go this build on the Drifter. The Drifter might feel like quite a familiar character. I will say that out of pretty much all of the starting classes, the Drifter to me is the one that feels like this character could have just been in regular Gloomhaven, or could have been in something like Jaws of the Lion. It feels like a very comfortable character to begin with. It feels like you can easily slip into playing the character with very little experience of the game. You can really get up to speed very, very quickly and learn the different combos of the cards and which persistent abilities you want to use. It doesn't feel like a character that will require you many scenarios to kind of start to figure out how this character combos all of its different cards together. Unlike some of the other ones like Geminate, for example, which I would expect most players to take quite a while to be able to get comfortable playing. But with the Drifter, I think this is definitely a character that you can kind of give to somebody, and then over the course of just one single scenario, I would expect by the end of it, you'd really understand how the different kind of cogs and wheels turn of this character. We also have a hand size of 12, which is very good for a character. However, it is worth bearing in mind that we will pretty much be immediately burning 2 of our active abilities when we first get into the scenario. So really, from about the second run through, we are on 10 cards from that point onwards, or down to 9, I guess, after we rest and lose one as well. So I generally like running with 2 persistent abilities very early on, then maybe adding the 3rd persistent ability in the 2nd or 3rd room, depending on how long the scenario is, seeing when you've got a good opportunity to be able to play that 3rd persistent ability up that will then kind of help you out with whatever you're trying to achieve in the scenario. But I like generally running 2 persistent abilities to begin with, and then we see where the scenario goes, and then if I have a need for the 3rd, I will play it. But you don't want to get too hung up on the fact that you're a 12 card character, because yeah, you're not really technically a 12 card character. So with persistent abilities, these are the ones that go up into your active area and they will give you some kind of bonus when you do an action. So there are ranged ones for the ranged build, which will give you additional range and a little bit of extra damage. There are healing ones that will give you more heal every time you do a heal action. There are ones that increase your move. There are ones that increase your melee damage. There are lots of different things you can do here. Ones that give you shield, ones that give you retaliate. So we'll be going through all of these and we'll be kind of evaluating them. But what you'll also notice on a lot of the Drifter cards is that some of the values might seem a little bit lower and you're thinking, that seems like quite a low value. Well, this is because you're always going to be, well, for the most part, you will be comboing these abilities off with those persistent abilities, which will buff them up and make them much stronger. So though on the surface, quite a lot of move abilities or attack abilities might seem a little bit underpowered in terms of the values that's printed on them, it's very important to understand that that will not be the value that you will probably end up doing for that action. So we'll have to make sure that we consider that as we go along. So let's take a look at the cards. So first up, we have Precision Aim. All your ranged attacks have +1 range. On your next 6 ranged attacks, add +1. It's got 6 charges on it, so potentially up to 6 uses without moving any tokens back, which is what the bottom of this actually does, which is move 2. Then we can move the character token on one of our persistent abilities backwards 1 slot. So this will give us the opportunity to maybe get more than those 6 charges by moving those tokens back. Importantly, I'll mention this now, you only gain XP when a token passes in the forwards direction the XP symbol. You do not get it when you go backwards. So you can get more XP than the 3 printed on the card, because if you manage to get that token to go back behind an XP symbol and then push it forwards through it again, then you will get the XP again. But it is important to note you don't get the XP when you go backwards. It's only when you go forwards on the charges. But Precision Aim is obviously a hallmark of the ranged damage build. It is going to be your superstar card, especially at level 1, for you to be able to do additional damage with your ranged and an additional range value so that you can actually get things a little bit further away. I have found the range build to be slightly lower on the raw damage numbers compared to the melee build, but that's kind of a trade-off between the danger that you might be facing if you are a melee drifter. You are going to put yourself onto the front line. More likely the enemies are going to attack you. So it's sort of a little bit of a more dangerous approach, if you like. So I always feel like that's why ranged characters generally do a little bit less, or ranged abilities do generally a little bit less damage. It's because, well, you're going to have an element of safety here where you could potentially hit an enemy and run away, or wouldn't be the focus of attacks anyway. So, but Precision Aim, absolutely, the top of this card is excellent. It's 100% what you want to be playing, but only if you are playing the ranged build. If you're playing the melee build, you absolutely do not want the top of this card because it does nothing for you. However, the bottom is a very reliable way to just continually get your tokens back. You're going to want abilities like this, especially abilities that trigger regardless of what happens. We'll be seeing some cards later on that have conditions that you need to meet in order to be able to move the token back, which can mean that it can be a bit inconsistent. The worst enemy of a drifter player is burning out, essentially. The worst thing that could possibly happen to you really is that for some reason you burn through a bunch of your charges and you have no way of getting them back, or you lose sight of that economy of pushing the tokens forwards, then pulling them back again with the other cards. If you lose that kind of economy with some of your key cards, you will struggle. It's quite hard to do. You know, I feel like you really have to purposely almost go out of your way to do it, but it is a pitfall that you could fall into, and one that you need to avoid. So the bottom of this card, excellent, really. Move the character token back regardless of what you do. You're always going to want to move 2 at some point, or potentially more as we get into some of the other movement stuff. So yeah, very, very solid. 66 initiative is a pretty bad initiative overall. It's late-ish, so it could be used as a late initiative, but it's not really late enough to guarantee that you'll be able to go after the enemies. It's kind of like a fine initiative that you might weave in here or there, but it's really not an attractive initiative in terms of trying to ensure that you go first or late. But you could maybe interweave yourself somewhere halfway through the order, which can sometimes be more useful here in Frosthaven than it was in Gloomhaven. So yeah, I feel like that's a pretty decent card. Next up, we have Violent Inheritance, which is a attack 1 then a loot 1 on the top, 70 initiative, and the bottom is move 4, attack 3 at range 3. Now, I actually quite like the top of Violent Inheritance. It's a top loot action, and looting in Frosthaven is so much more important because of trying to get all of those building materials to help you with your outpost phase and with your crafting and all of that good stuff. So you really do want to engage in the looting system. And one thing that you'll notice across all of the Frosthaven characters is their loots are generally just a little bit nicer. They're a little bit more usable. They've got some upside to them. They're not just boring loot cards anymore, or at least most of them are. So this is a really nice action. Of course, that attack 1 could be a little bit more when we'll look at a card in a minute. So that card can be a little bit more. So that attack 1 can often be an attack 3 using crushing weight. So I think that that's pretty decent. And obviously the loot 1 will allow you to potentially pick up that loot from that enemy that you've just killed, hopefully. So I actually really like the top of Violent Inheritance, mainly because I was playing the melee build with crushing weight. If you are not playing the melee build and you're playing ranged, I think that you'll struggle a little bit more with this, but it is still a top loot action, which can allow you to just very efficiently potentially move in. And if there were like 3 loot tokens on the floor, all within range 1 of each other, and you can go in and just do that loot 1 and pick up 3 tokens in 1 round, I think that's very efficient looting. So you know, it's still probably going to have some sort of application in the ranged build, but really it's probably best suited for the melee build, I would say, or at least this top action is. The bottom is our move 4, attack 3, and range 3 with the burn, though. So all the burn, you'll notice on the Drifter, most of your XP will come through the triggering of your passive abilities. It's not going to come necessarily from the card actions themselves. You know, an action like this on the bottom, you might usually traditionally expect to see maybe a 1 XP or something like that, or 2 XP for a burn. But no, you're going to get all of that through your persistent abilities. So you'll notice a distinct lack of XP on certain cards. But don't worry about that. You're going to be getting your XP for your persistent abilities. And trust me, you can earn a lot. But move 4, attack 3, range 3. It's a bottom attack, which can be quite useful. It's a big move as well, and comboed with some of your persist abilities to make it even bigger, it can be quite nice. As a burn action, I think this is just kind of fair. I don't think it's particularly amazing, but in a certain situation when, let's say, you get towards the end of the scenario and you've got to fight a big elite or a big boss or something like that, and there's a chest at the back of a room that you really need to get to, something like the bottom of Violent Inheritance is pretty usable as a burn action. And the fact that the top is going to give you some nice value across the entire scenario, probably in the last room when there's not as much loot going, you'll be thinking, okay, well, what can I do now? The bottom is a very usable burn action. So I actually think Violent Inheritance is pretty decent. 70 initiative is a little bit late. You know, it's sort of trending towards that late. Similar to the previous card, though. It's not going to guarantee you late, but it's a pretty decent late initiative. You can always give it a go. Against certain enemy types, it will be much better as well. So Violent Inheritance, I'm actually a fan of this. I'm a fan of quite a lot of looting type actions. And if you're playing the melee build in particular, I think that this is one that you probably definitely want to include at least early on to be able to get lots and lots of nice loot. But if you're playing the ranged, you might not consider this card. It would be sort of down to your personal preference. Next up, we have a Deadly Shot, which is an attack 1, range 4 with poison. Nice ability here with that additional precision aim. We could potentially make it an attack 2 at range 5, sorry, with poison. It's a bit better, but, you know, is the extra range overkill here? Maybe, but certain scenarios you'll need some extra range, so I guess it's okay. It's a very kind of fine action. I actually found the top of this to be usable in certain situations in the melee build as well, although the numbers do seem quite underwhelming on this. Just chucking a poison on an important elite enemy can be very, very useful in a down kind of turn when you're not really doing too much. Maybe you don't want to run in yet. You know, it gives you an opportunity to get a poison on a high value target to help kill it a bit quicker later. So I actually feel like quite a few of the ranged abilities have a little bit more of like a nice sideboard kind of potential, or some nice sort of situational use for the melee build in certain situations. Whereas the range build might not find that the melee cards are useful for it as much. The range build, to me, feels a bit more, if you're going hard on that, you're a bit more kind of constricted on the cards that you want. Whereas I feel like with the melee, you can kind of have crushing weight up, and you can always run around and use default attack 2 actions with crushing weight up So yeah, that to me is isn't really like a huge deal. So Deadly Shot, I quite like. The bottom of this is move 4, which I really like. I got move 4, excellent. You're going to need some decent moves. And also, if you're not playing the move persistent, which we'll get to in a second, you're going to need some decent moves. So I actually really like Deadly Shot as an overall card for both builds. I think it's the melee. You'll probably end up using it as just a move 4 a lot of the time. But if you need to, you've got that top action, which could help you get a bit of reach, bit of range on some enemies, and to say chuck that poison on. And if you're playing the range build, then it can also just be upgraded and be more useful anyway. So yeah, Deadly Shot is an excellent card in both builds, and the 32 initiative is decently early. It will allow you to kind of go in that kind of early to maybe not so early to allow your allies to go before you kind of range. So 32, it's an okay initiative to use as well. So yeah, I like Deadly Shot quite a bit. Next we have Sustain Momentum. So Sustain Momentum is attack 2 on the top, melee. Move the character token on one of your persistent abilities backwards 1 slot. Really love this ability. With Crushing Weight, this is going to be an attack 4 most of the time. So as we get to Crushing Weight in a second, you'll see that, yeah, Crushing Weight is so good, and just attack 4 and then being able to move the charge back on the Crushing Weight that you just used. Super good. Anything that allows you to basically attack then move something back is probably going to really appeal to you, because you're just going to immediately be able to get that bonus and then, you know, not lose the charge, if you like. And this is a great way for you to be able to kind of get that XP as well in some of those jumps multiple times, because you could always push it forward, get the XP, then move it back, and then on the next turn you're going to push it forward, get the XP again, and you can see how this character can really snowball with their XP gain. But attack 4 is, as a standard action, is probably a little bit above the curve, I would say, maybe. It is melee, and there are no additional kind of effects onto it. So it's not like you're poisoning or cursing or muddling the enemy here with this ability. It is just an attack 4, but it's very solid, and this is a key card in the Crushing Weight melee build. So yeah, top of Sustain Momentum is fantastic for that. For the range build, I don't think you really want to entertain the top of this card at all, but you may entertain the bottom, but also probably less likely to entertain the bottom in the ranged. So 76 initiative. On the next 6 move abilities, add +2 move. So this is obviously going to be very useful in scenarios where you have to escape, or it's a very long scenario, lots and lots of hexes. As you can see, we've had 1 move 4, but a lot of the other movements leave a lot to be desired on the Drifter at times. So you will find some great use for the bottom of this, probably on both builds, but realistically on the range, you can usually just move 2 or move 4, of course, with the bottom of Deadly Shot. You know, they're moving a little bit every single turn and just sort of progressing through is gonna do you some good. But if you're playing a melee build, you often have to sort of chase enemies around and maybe go into corners of rooms where a ranged character would never need to go to that corner, because they can sit in the middle of the room and they can attack everything from the middle of that room, whereas a melee character is always sort of chasing enemies around. So I feel like Sustained Momentum in general is a card that will be best served completely in the melee build. The range build may have some application for the bottom of this card, but personally I feel like it's mostly going to be an all-in melee card. And 76 initiative it's again on the later side. You'll notice with some of the initiatives with this character, they're kind of a little bit they're a little bit all over the place. Like they're very much in the middle range with the Drifter. It doesn't feel like we are a character who is always going early and always going late. We kind of have a very kind of mixed bag of initiatives. So yeah, but the top of this, very strong. Sustain Momentum, 100%. If you're playing melee, you want this card. Next up, we have Relentless. So the top of this is move the character tokens on 2 of your persistent abilities backwards 1 slot. No other abilities on it. This is purely just what this does. I am not a huge fan of the top of this ability, because I've actually found that using cards like Sustain Momentum that we just seen and other cards that allow you to move charges back, I've actually found managing the charges pretty easy, and I've never really been in a situation where I needed to use this. Of course, it looks like a great card to use in between rooms. It seems like that's the kind of intention here. You're never going to be playing the top of Relentless when you are, you know, surrounded by enemies. You're going to need to do some damage or run away or do something. So it's a bit of a do nothing, or at least it doesn't push the scenario forward in any way in terms of, you winning. If you're playing in a kill all enemies style scenario, this doesn't do any damage to enemies. It might do in the future, but you're basically just pushing the can down the road, right? You're kicking the can down the road, thinking, yeah, I'll get you on the next turn. But as we know, playing the Haven games, stamina is also one of your worst enemies. So having turns that don't do a lot can sometimes be problematic. But you will have opportunities, I'm sure, to be able to potentially, between a room, play the top of Relentless. So, there is some use there, but I'm personally not a huge fan. I've never found that I really needed to use it. Now, the bottom of this card, though, I think is pretty excellent, although I never ended up using it through my personal playthrough that much. But the bottom of this card is actually very good. It's basically just free damage. So on the next 6 attacks targeting you, performed by enemies within range 2, gain retaliate 2 at range 2. So this will give you the ability to just get free damage, basically. It's 2 free pure damage that will go through with your retaliate. Now, of course, you have to get hit in order for this to go. So with all of retaliate abilities, there's a little bit of a trade-off here where, okay, I'm taking damage to do damage back. But of course, as a drifter, especially as a melee drifter, you're naturally going to be taking hits. So it's kind of free damage in a way, and you can play this out. Now, I have less love, though, for some of the persistent abilities like this that are outside of the player's control somewhat. So, for example, you may be surrounded by enemies here, and you may burn through all 6 charges of this in a single round, which, might not be the end of the world. That might actually be pretty good value, depending on what point of the scenario you're in. But of course, if you play this immediately at the beginning of the scenario on your first turn, and you're like, yep, I'm good to go, and then you lose all 6 charges within the next sort of turn or 2 turns, and you have no ability to get the charges back, because once that token falls off that last spot, the card is gone. It goes to your lost pile. It is unrecoverable. It's gone, right? You're not getting that back. So, sorry, it's not unrecoverable, but in that sense. But it's, yeah, you get my point. It's gone. You're not going to be able to get it back. So you're not going to be able to get charges. So abilities like this have a little bit of a risk factor with them, where you're burning a card and you're going to do X amount of damage. And if you did 6, I mean, that's still 12 damage, which I think is still very good. You would probably burn a card to do 12 damage if the card just said, hey, burn this card, do 12. It is spread around potentially multiple targets, but it is still 12 free points of damage at the very least. So I feel like the bottom of Relentless is very good, although personally I've never actually really been playing with it, but I think it's pretty excellent in terms of free damage perspective. You're just going to need maybe some other kind of characters to be able to support you in different ways, because with the Drifter you're often making a conscious choice between your playstyle. You can only really have 2 persistent burns out at any one time, or that's like my general experience, and then we move up to like 3 and 4. When you're trying to do the mastery, you kind of go a bit crazy, and towards the end of a scenario you might end up with 3 in play, and maybe in the last few rounds you might end up with 4. Depends really on the scenario. So there's a lot of ifs and buts here on how you want to play it. But I found, for the most part, that I play with 2 right out of the gates, and then I maybe get myself up to 3 at certain points. So it depends on what your party composition is. If you have other characters who can heal and can keep you topped up, then perhaps you don't need to be playing the heal one on the Drifter. If you've got other characters that can maybe grant you shield or in different ways, right? Some sort of protection, or can tank a little bit more, then potentially maybe you don't need the shielding one, or potentially you don't need this one because you're not actually going to be retaliating much because you're not going to be attacked. So you really need to mix and match a few of these to how your party comp and your kind of style of play. So Relentless at bottom, I think, is excellent, but it really requires you to be aware that, this isn't just, oh, I put this out and that's it. You may find that your mileage will vary depending on the scenario, depending on the characters in your party and what they bring to the table as well. But overall, Relentless bottom, I think, is where it's at. The top of Relentless, I don't really rate too much. 89 Initiative, though, is very good for going late. So if you do want to go super, super late, this is a great card for doing that. Next up, we have Continuous Health, which is an attack 2, range 2, with move the character token on one of your persistent abilities backwards 1 slot. So this is kind of like the mirror image of the previous card with sustained momentum for the melee, this is the mirror kind of image on the range side of the ball. So this would be an attack 3, range 3, which is like the standard really for a ranged character, and you'll be able to move that token back potentially on that precision aim charge that you might have. So I actually quite like this. It is a slam dunk inclusion on the ranged build for sure. You could maybe play the top a little bit on the melee build, because of course getting to move a token back can be useful for any build that you're playing. So, you know, whenever you see a card that does something and it moves a token back, you could probably justify it in pretty much any build, because it's going to have some value with the persistence that you're playing anyway. It's always going to have that value, right? It's always going to have some value to every build. But I feel like the value of the top does sort of fall off for the melee build, because just doing an attack 2 at range 2, especially like level 1 when you've got a very bad attack modifier deck, you know, you draw a -1 and it's just an attack 1, it's not going to feel so good. So yeah, something to consider there. The bottom of this card though is my other sort of favorite active to play alongside Crushing Weight. So when I play my melee build, so continuous health bottom is on the next 6 heals, add +2 heal. So gives you the ability really to add 2 to every heal that you do. And this is something that I found incredibly useful at 2-player, because I'm taking hits all the time. I was playing the Deathwalker and the Drifter together, and the Drifter just needed to be that frontline character for me. I needed it to take hits, and just being able to, well, have continuous health was super, super useful. This combos off in many different ways with not only your own cards, but a load of items as well. You know, this works on heal selves. It also works on targeted heals. So you could actually, you know, heal your friend up for a lot more as well. So you could heal an ally up with a targeted heal and give them a nice big heal. That's part of the ranged build. So the bottom of this card is actually very useful for both builds. It's very useful for the melee build at keeping yourself alive, and in the ranged build it's more useful as a support piece to be able to continually heal the other character that might be tanking in your party. So bottom of continuous health I think is excellent. Another few combos you need to think about is that it works with long resting. So when you long rest and you heal 2, you'll actually heal 4 if you can trigger a charge of continuous health, if you have a charge left to trigger. So that's really, really cool. But it is also something to consider, because I have had sort of times when I've had that charge on that last spot and I've thought, I could really do with long resting here to get these items back, but of course if I do that, then that heal 2 happens and the continuous health will trigger. It's important, I haven't mentioned it before, but you always have to spend a charge if the whatever it is that you're doing is using it. These are not may sort of abilities. If you are doing something, the charge will have to be used if it qualifies, right? So continuous health, bottom, you can get yourself into a little bit of trouble there where it gets to the last, but honestly, it's not that hard to control, and you're generally going to be having 2 of these out. Like I said, for me, the first turn of the game, I love to play the bottom of this and the top of Crushing Weight, and then I'm kind of ready to go from turn 2 onwards. I feel like my Drifter is ready to go. Works really well with some of the items as well in the game. Works really well with healing potions once you get them and upgrade them. Works really well with the Amulet of Life as well, which is an item that you can buy from the purchasable item supply when you first create your Drifter character, and it is one of the recommended ones in the book, and for a good reason. It is very, very good. Good at just clearing poison and things like that as well. But I guess that's the only other downside really to the bottom of continuous health, is that if you are in a scenario with like a bunch of poison, it can sometimes feel like, well, I'm kind of wasting that 2 heal because I'm getting poisoned. But I mean, in those kind of scenarios, you can just play slightly differently. You could maybe not use the bottom of continuous health and maybe use a different ability anyway. But I feel like it's generally still pretty useful, and you'll still at least get a couple of decent heals out of it over the course of a scenario. It's a very low risk one to bring in for me as a ability. You can play it on turn 1 and kind of forget about it until you're like, oh, I need to heal, and then suddenly you've got this really nice sort of card sitting there for you. So continuous health, excellent card. I think it's probably well, it's actually usable really in both builds, but I feel like the bottom is where you're probably going to end up playing if you're playing the melee. If you're playing range, you might play both halves of this card a little bit more. Next up, we have Draining Arrows, which is an attack 1, target 3, range 2, and muddle. Really nice number of targets here, 3. Bear in mind that this uses 3 charges of your precision aim because it is targeting 3, and precision aim is for your individual attacks. So this would be 3 charges, which is a lot of charges to use in one single ability. It is quite nice, though, to be able to potentially do an attack 2 on 3 things at range 2 and muddle. That starts to feel a little bit more like a burn ability. Sorry, it'll be even range 3 with precision aim, so you'd even get additional range there. So it does start to feel a little bit more like what might feel like a burn ability in some ways, and it could be a very impactful turn, especially if you wanted to finish off a bunch of stuff, and that muddle could really come in useful for mitigating some damage too. So Draining Arrows top, it's good, I think, but as someone who doesn't prefer the ranged build to the melee build, I kind of look at it as going, well, would I really want to burn through 3 charges here? 3 charges is a lot of charges, and then trying to get them back again is going to be a bit more difficult, right? Sometimes that's you can really control the kind of, okay, I'm using 1, maybe 2 charges a turn, and then I'm getting those 1 or 2 charges back, like in the same kind of time frames. So you kind of end up mostly being able to keep the abilities around for the entire scenario. But something like Draining Arrows top, if you would hit all 3 and suddenly it would accelerate for 3, you'd have to be careful, because towards the end of a scenario, when you've already got that token potentially onto the bottom row of precision aim, you're not even really going to be able to play Draining Arrows, because suddenly you're going to lose it all. And it would be more like okay guys, let's try and finish the scenario and go out with a bang, and you would use it as more of like a one-time big attack kind of ability, almost treating it like a burn, like I said. So yeah, Draining Arrows is good, but you'd have to be very careful with managing those charges on precision aim for sure. 23 initiative is our earliest initiative we've seen so far, and a very usable initiative to try and go early. I also quite like using a boost of speed on the Drifter to be able to modify my initiative up or down by 10. So 23 can often be 13, which is really good. So quite happy with that. The bottom is move 3. If you are adjacent to exactly 1 enemy, move the character token on one of your position abilities backwards 1 slot. Now again, we're going to be looking for cards like this. We are looking for abilities that will allow us to get our charges back, especially on bottom abilities as well, because potentially we could gain a charge somehow here, right? For example, if we were to use Sustain Momentum top, which is attack, and then we get to get the charge back, this will actually allow us to get an additional charge, so we're kind of 1 up on the deal. You know, if you're potentially only consuming 1 charge per round and you're being able to get back 2, that's really good, and that can give you some nice wiggle room there. Also good to use on something like Continuous Health to try and get some charges of your heal back as well. So Draining Arrows bomb, I really like this. Move 3 is nice. You should be able to get Nick next to an enemy here. You should be able to position yourself in a way to trigger the fact that you're adjacent to only 1. Sometimes it won't happen. I have had situations where that can happen. But a 23 initiative with a move 3, if there was nothing else printed on this card, it's probably going to get your attention a little bit anyway. And then, of course, you've got that really nice ability on the bottom there, which is, you know, sometimes not going to trigger, but I would say 80-90% of the time you are triggering the bottom of this, especially if you're playing the melee. Of course, if you're playing ranged, then really you're not going to want to be close to enemies, most likely. So I feel like this card doesn't really do too well, or the bottom of this card doesn't do too well for the ranged build. Obviously, you got the top, which is powerful for the ranged build, absolutely, but risky. So this is one of those kind of weird cards where I'm not sure, depending on how much investment you really want to do and how comfortable you are with moving your charges back on your precision aim, you may get incredibly good at it, and you may be able to find a nice tempo where you can get those charges back. But if you are kind of, you know, you're just starting out on your Drifter journey and you're playing this character for the first time, just want to kind of flag up that Draining Arrows seems quite good, but actually could end up burning through a lot of those charges of precision aim, then leaving you with maybe not that many charges for the rest of the scenario. So, or none charges for the rest of the scenario, which could be problematic, and you will definitely feel deflated from that point. There's nothing really worse with the Drifter with playing without any of your persistent abilities up. It just feels very, very vanilla, very plain. All of the values are undertuned. It just doesn't feel like you can really operate without those abilities in play, those passive abilities in play. So something to really watch. But the bottom of this, absolutely love when I play the melee. Triggered it multiple times. Really, really good. And the initiative as well is good to boot. So yeah, love us some draining arrows. Next up, we have Vile Assault, which is an attack 2 with poison on the top, and then attack 2 with a wound. It is a burn. This is our kind of best level 1 melee attack burn, in my opinion. Being able to potentially use Crushing Weight, which gives us +2 to all of our melees. That will give us an attack 4 here, and poison. And then, of course, if we wanted to attack the same enemy again, we're going to be attacking for 4 with now that poison. So that will be 5, and we'll be adding a wound, which is be a guaranteed point of damage at some point onto them as well. So incredibly good at killing bosses here. If you're trying to kill a troublesome elite or a boss, this will delete them. Absolutely. Really, really strong. I know it doesn't look amazing on the surface when you do it, but with that Crushing Weight, ooh, it's so good. So Vile Assault top, absolutely love this card. But of course, sometimes you're not going to want to have a card stuck in your hand just for that one enemy that you might face in the final room or in the middle kind of sections of the game. So, you know, the bottom's also got to be pretty usable, and lucky for us, it very much is as well. So 27 initiative is good, usable initiative there. Very kind of, it's kind of early, but not too early. But again, modifiable with boots to go super early, or could just give you a nice opportunity to filter in after your teammates if you want to. So I like this initiative. I think it's pretty usable. Yeah, you got this move 2 and heal 2 self. So with continuous health, this is move 2, heal 4. Really, really good. Such a great way of getting some health back in a situation when perhaps you take a hit where you weren't expecting it, and then to suddenly be able to get yourself back up to a really decent amount of health. Really, really good. Even if you're not playing continuous health, move 2, heal 2 is very high value ability in my opinion. It really gives you some breathing room because you're not always going to want to move more than 2. Sometimes you will, of course you will, and sometimes you'll be looking down at this card going, man, I just can't do anything with it because I can't get into range or do anything. But it's also a pretty decent ability to play once you've cleared a room and you're just moving around and maybe picking up some extra loot because you have a few more cards than other players. Perhaps you've got a bit more stamina, you've got a little bit of breathing room to be able to move on to some loot and sort of do a couple of kind of dead turns before you long rest. Then move 2, heal 2. It's going to work really good for you. So absolutely love the bottom of Vile Assault as well, and the top being a really, really effective way of singling out and killing one enemy very quickly, but also potentially just, you know, attacking 2 enemies if you want to as well. You can split this up if needs be. Makes it pretty versatile in that department as well. Love Vile Assault. Think it's a fantastic card for if you're playing the melee build. If you are playing the ranged build, I think like this card does diminish quite a lot in value, just because realistically, are you going to want to do the top of this burn as just an attack 2 with poison, attack 2 with a wound? It's still decent, but it's yeah, not on the level that it could be for sure, but it's still decent. And then the bottom of this, you know, with the move to heal 2 self. If you're playing range, the chances are you're more concerned with healing other people, not yourself. So you may find that, although it isn't always good to have this, you know, sometimes multi-targets exist. Sometimes you need to move forward and take a hit for your buddies. Sometimes your scenario conditions will get you wounded or whatever. So there are always reasons where a heal self will be useful. It's never not going to be useful, you know, in certain situations and scenarios, but certainly becomes less so. So something to really consider there. I love Vile Assault. I think it's fantastic. Really, really good. Slam dunk. Always going to be playing with this card if you're playing the melee drifter. Next up, we have Bloodletting, which is an attack 3. If you killed an enemy with the attack ability, move the character token on one of your persistent abilities backwards 1 slot. Yes, this is attack 3, and with Crushing Weight, this will now be an attack 5 potentially. And yeah, Bloodletting is just insanely good for the Crushing Weight build. Attacking for 5 at level 1. This is the type of card that I think when people look at the starters and the general consensus is, well, Drifter seems pretty strong, it's because of this card. You know, a lot of the other characters have to jump through a lot more hoops to kind of get this value, where this is just, hey, yep, you can attack for 5. It really doesn't take you very much setup at all. And yeah, you can be able to hopefully kill something as well. If you do kill it, then you're going to get it to come back. If you don't kill it, yeah, you're probably unlucky, I would say, but also does it really matter? You've attacked something for 5. So, yeah, obviously you would love to kill something here. I don't feel like you want to necessarily be going after enemies just have low health just to get the trigger, because of course attacking for 5 is very, very valuable. That's what you want to be doing. I don't think you want to be going after an enemy that's only got 1 health just to try and get the trigger. Of course, if you've got this in your hand and that's available to you and that's the only enemy left, of course, but this could also just be a really good way of kind of opening into an enemy if you aren't too worried about spending an extra charge on something and maybe not getting it back. You've got those move abilities, you know, to be able to get charges back in other ways as well. So, you know, don't be shy. You can definitely do this. And if you can combo it maybe with some advantage as well, then obviously you've got a really good chance here of killing something anyway, especially at low levels and certain enemy types. So absolutely love the top of Bloodletting. Superstar card for the melee build. Useless, unfortunately, though, for the ranged build, pretty much. I mean, there may be a situation where on the ranged build, you may move in and, you know, you do have that enemy that has 1 health and you kill it to get a charge back on your precision aim to use potentially, you know, more draining arrows and things like that. But that to me seems like a very kind of magical Christmassy land kind of ideal situation that if you're playing like in 3 and 4 players may not come up that much. But if you're playing 2-player, you're playing solo, you can definitely try to orchestrate these things a little bit more. But yeah, I would say on the face of it, probably not a card that you really want for the ranged build, or at least ability you want for the ranged build. The bottom is attack 1 with wound as well. So a bottom attack here, always good to see attacks out of order. So having this on the bottom rather than on the top of a card, always good. Same with moves. Having a move on the top is always quite attractive because it allows you to do a double move or potentially position yourself in a nice way. So this could be really, really good as well with Crushing Weight, because Crushing Weight could make this attack 3 with wound. So a really nice way for you to be able to potentially attack one enemy and then maybe attack a different enemy or go really hard on a particular enemy. Of course, you'll have to start your turn in the right location, which might be a little bit tricky for you. Could be, but not that hard to really do. I love Bloodletting because both halves of this card are just excellent for the melee build, regardless of how you want to try and play them. So very versatile card in the melee build to give you some nice options to potentially do one big attack with the top, or potentially do 2 separate attacks that are each individually a little bit smaller, but it's 2 attacks, right? So the bottom can work quite nicely against a poisoned enemy, because potentially, you know, use it with the top of Vile Assault. You've poisoned an enemy as well, then you use Bloodletting bottom to wound that guy. So if you were to use it with Vile Assault, you do the attack 2 poison on a certain enemy, right, with your Crushing Weight, so attack 4 with poison. Then maybe you attack something else, a different enemy, for 4 with wound, and then you could follow up with the bottom of Bloodletting on the first enemy that you had poisoned to then be able to attack them with Crushing Weight for attack 3 with the poison, 4, and wound again. So you can see how this character, with some very, you know, not potentially difficult initiative dancing and play and charge usage, some clever charge usage, you can see that the melee can output a ton of damage in a single round if it needs to or wants to. So yeah, Bloodletting, absolutely love it. Ranged build though is quite sad. 65 initiative is pretty bad in terms of where you want to go with this. You're probably going to be pairing it either early if you're doing it with the bottom action, or you might be pair it late if you're doing it maybe with the top action, because maybe you might let an ally sort of attack an enemy first. So 65 might be an okay initiative really for the top ability, but for the bottom ability, less so, I would say. Next up, we have Unbreakable, which is move the character token on 2 of your persistent abilities backwards 1 slot. 90 initiative. So again, similar to the last one that we had that allowed you to move the tokens back. I'm not a fan of these abilities. I feel like they are filler abilities that if you play your character relatively well and manage your charges relatively well, you shouldn't really have the need to play the top of this. Again, like before, there's going to be a situation where potentially you may be able to do this between rooms and you get a bit of a break. But I will say that in Frosthaven scenario design, I found it very less likely that you can take those natural long rest breaks than you did in Gloomhaven. Gloomhaven was all about opening doors. So much of Gloomhaven's strategy revolved around how you were going to open a door, how you were going to approach a new room each and every time. Frosthaven, a lot of the time you're playing in big single tile scenarios where enemies are just coming at you. There are round effects that are coming in every, odd or even round. You need to do something quickly and then something else triggers in the scenario book. The scenarios themselves are so much more, I would say, like diverse in their way that they're designed. And they're so much more like unpredictable, maybe is a good word. So that they are always going to be throwing things at you. So the whole kind of concept of, yeah, I can play this, then this, then this, and then I will long rest and then do this and this, like that kind of like, if you like, perfect world of being able to do that, which you could often do in Gloomhaven, doesn't really happen here in Frosthaven. So that's something to really consider when you're looking at cards like this, because you might be, basing that information from Gloomhaven thinking, oh yeah, of course, I always got time to rest, so I can use it. I think you'll find, and when you start playing Frosthaven after a while, you'll start to realize, actually, no, this isn't actually going to work for me, and we're actually not going to have that break. So yeah, just something to I want to put on people's radar there. 90 initiative is really good for a late initiative though. So really, really good if you do just have a nothing. If the enemies are at the other end of the room and you're just going to wait for them to come to you, then you could potentially play this. So there might be some usage there when you're really just waiting enemies out to get a bit closer. The bottom is on the next 6 sources of damage from attacks targeting you, gain shield 1. So this is like one of the tanking ones, maybe in combination with the retaliate one. Again, with that retaliate one, that was free damage. Damage can be very, very powerful. This is mitigation. So I prefer continuous health over this because, of course, continuous health is 2 heal, whereas potentially this is just 1 shield, right? So it's mitigating 1 point of damage, whereas potentially continuous health is mitigating 2 points of damage. However, you obviously have to play a heal action to be able to get continuous health triggers. So there is a downside in that sense. But an upside in that sense is that you can actually trigger it with items and with long rests and things like that. So there are a little bit more tricky ways that you can trigger continuous health to Unbreakable. Also similar to the Retaliate one, this is another one that could be completely out of your hands as a player. If the enemies you're in a scenario and the scenario book says, oh no, ambush, and 6 enemies pop out of nowhere and surround you, right? I mean, that doesn't happen super often, to be clear, because that would be really brutal. But, situations where the enemies do something you're not expecting and they end up being able to land a bunch of attacks that you weren't thinking about. Suddenly, your unbreakable charges are all gone. It's done its job. It saved you some damage, of course, but it's just one of those things where you're like, okay, I've burned another card. That kind of stamina burn that you've gone through. It's another card that you've burned, and it's potentially a card off the table for you as well. So for me, Unbreakable is a card that I actually feel like isn't super playable. Maybe in like a survive type scenario where you really wanted some extra shield or something like that. But I actually feel like Unbreakable, out of all of the cards that we've seen so far, is the one that I'm probably the least high on. That I think overall it's a underwhelming top action mixed with potentially an underwhelming bottom action. Although I still feel like there is some good situations where this card could be useful. And certainly if you want to play more of a tanky character and that's going to be your vibe, then you can use it a bit more. So unlike in Gloomhaven where I would write cards off entirely, I'm very hesitant to write off any card entirely in Frosthaven just because it is, there's going to be situations and scenarios or slight play styles or party compositions where stuff can work. So that's Unbreakable. Finally, we've been talking about it all this time, but we can finally talk about Crushing Weight. So I probably should have put this card like number 1 on the list of cards that we were reviewing because we sort of referenced this card so much with all of the other cards. However, Crushing Weight, amazing card, amazing ability. If you're playing melee, this is your favorite card that you will ever play and will stick with you forever, regardless of what level you are. Crushing Weight is excellent. And on the next 6 melee attacks, add +2 attack. Works with your default attack actions as well, which means that all of your default attack actions do turn into attack 4 as well. Doesn't seem to happen a huge amount on the Drifter, but I always like to mention that as a a positive there. So really, really good. I mean, what is left to say about this? Obviously, if you're playing ranged, you have no interest in the top of this card whatsoever. But if you're playing melee, it is MVP, and it is the card that you play on turn 1, pretty much without fail, every single scenario. So yeah, crushing weight top, excellent. 71 initiative. Initiative is kind of a bit irrelevant for me on this card because, again, I'm going to be playing it on the first round and then it's gone. So don't really need to worry about the implications of playing the initiative too much for the way that I like to play the card. But for the range build, you have move, so you have heal 2, sorry, range 2. Move the character token on one of your persistent abilities backwards 1 slot. So there is some situations here where I haven't burned crushing weight on the first turn. I've actually left it, and then I've maybe used the heal to be able to heal an ally with continuous health to be able to give them a nice big heal, especially if you get some really horrible scenario effects. You know, like, for example, all of your characters start with wound, all of your characters start with brittle or something like that. You may actually just want to, like, I'm just going to chuck a heal out, and then potentially you could use maybe like a stamina potion to be able to get crushing weight back to then get it into play on the following turn or something like that. So yeah, the bottom of this is actually like pretty usable in the ranged build as well as a support ability. So it does have some use, and of course it does move the character token back, which is going to be very useful for you, definitely. So ranged build is interested in the bottom of this card for sure. Melee, though, is slam dunk, windmill slamming this card, and we'll be playing it probably on the first turn for the crushing weight, pretty much every single scenario. And last of the level 1 cards, before we go into the X cards, we have Prudent Preparation, which is a shield 1, retaliate 1 on the top. 14 initiative, really, really nice early initiative, our earliest initiative that we've seen so far. And the bottom is heal 2, range 3. Now, of course, the top of this, it needs to be an early initiative to be a playable ability at all. So it needed to be 14 for the top to even be something to consider. This can work out quite nicely in a situation where you do just want to trigger a bunch of retaliate against enemies that have high shield and are very difficult to attack. Possibly they have retaliate themselves. This actually works quite well with the retaliate passive ability and with the shielding passive ability, because both of those are on the bottom of your cards. So in theory, you could get yourself, maybe go late, let all of the enemies kind of move around a little bit, move right into the middle of the enemies. Then on the following turn, you go really early, use 14 as your initiative. You could shield up, retaliate, and then maybe play one of the bottom of that, of the shielding one or the retaliating one, to then give yourself a really nice big turn of shielding and retaliating. That could be quite nice, could definitely buy some breathing room for your team, and you can kind of sit there and do some damage to some enemies. So there's definitely some really nice situations. Also, it's a very early initiative card, and that's going to come into your factors a lot. You know, you're going to be thinking, I need a nice mix. Unlike in Gloomhaven, I will say that I have learnt my lessons about initiative a lot more in Frosthaven, because weaving your initiative dancing between, you know, going super late, then going early on the next turn to try and get 2 back-to-back turns, that is so much more important in Frosthaven than it necessarily was in Gloomhaven, where your ability cards were so powerful individually that you could just go early, and just kill the enemies before they acted, disarm them, stun them, whatever it is that you could do. Like, the characters were so powerful with their ability cards that you never really needed to play that tempo on every single character where you're going late then early for the back-to-back turns. But I feel like in Frosthaven, it's a very important part of the game, and this will allow you to go super early, and yeah. I actually feel like it's a very decent card, and I will probably be using this just for this bottom action, as well as just as maybe a move 2 or a move 4 if you've got the passive ability that gives you additional move. So the bottom is heal 2 at range 3. You can target anybody you like. So again, a really nice card here to use with continuous health to just chuck a heal up on an ally. Even if you're playing melee and you're mostly healing yourself, occasionally you might want to heal an ally because they get themselves into trouble, and this gives you that. You know, I've been playing with the Deathwalker, and the Deathwalker didn't really have any heals, so if the Deathwalker ever found themselves out of position and in trouble, it was really down to the Brute to be able to like swoop in and try and chuck a heal wherever possible to try and help. So this is it's a big deal being able to just throw a heal on an ally, and healing is much more important, I would say, in Frosthaven than it was in Gloomhaven, because of the lack of those really top tier controlled abilities on every character or on most characters at least. So you really do need to watch your health and keep topping yourself up as you go, as well as there being much more negative conditions that can be quite bad for you, like brittle is awful potentially, could be terrible. So you're trying to get that off of you as quick as possible is also a big deal. So prudent preparation, I really like this card. I think both builds have good application for it. The melee is probably going to be interested in both halves of this card as well as just its initiative. The range is probably only really going to be interested in the bottom of this, but it's an early initiative as well, so they may just be using it as a move too. So yeah, prudent preparation is going to be a good solid card probably in both builds. So onto the first X card, we have a No Remorse, which is a heal 3, range 3 on the top. Decent value heal, 3 on its own without any buffs from any of our other abilities is pretty decent actually. Allow you to potentially just, remove poison or something if you wanted to. It's not bad. I actually quite like this as a heal. I think 3 is kind of like my kind of benchmark level for just like a regular heal. Of course, it is a top action with no other kind of use. So in terms of progressing the scenario, it's maybe not great, but it is pretty useful and can be clutch in certain situations. Range build with additional healing is always going to want to be playing the top of this pretty much to be able to just throw a huge heal onto your front liner at some point for 5, with continuous health. So yeah, No Remorse. I don't think the top is very interesting to the melee build because you're probably just going to be healing through your bottom actions and your items. But with the range build where you're actually needing to target people, then you're going to be wanting the top of this is pretty useful for that. 20 initiative, decent, usable early initiative there. Move 3, attack 3, and move 2. And in terms of burn abilities, this is obviously actually pretty decent for the melee build, being able to just move up to an enemy, attack them for 3 with that continuous weight. Hopefully that would be an attack 5, you would hope or expect. Then move 2 to potentially, if that enemy dies, you could move to a different enemy, and then you could use a top action to attack again. I really like the bottom of No Remorse as just a burn action for the melee, but unfortunately the top is kind of a bit of a dud. So this card to me is in a bit of a weird place. Which is kind of like what X cards are supposed to be, right? They're kind of supposed to be those kind of like flex cards that you may or may not use. Some of them, they're maybe more designed for a certain build or a certain play style. So I don't mind that this is a card that is a little bit confused in certain situations. I don't feel like there's many times when you're really going to do the bottom. You're not going to do the top with the melee build. So then the bottom just becomes 20 initiative, move 2 until it's time to use it. I guess what you could do is if you really wanted to get stuck into a scenario super aggressively, is you could play Crushing Weight as your top action on the first turn and then burn the bottom of No Remorse bottom to really just immediately jump into a scenario. And there will be probably situations when doing that will be pretty beneficial for you, and you can really get a nice head start in a scenario by doing that. So maybe in the scenario setup, this is the type of card you might want to look, and if there is an objective that says, hey, you need to get over here, and you're like, right, we need to get over there as soon as possible. We need to start hitting this thing because maybe it's like a boss or an enemy who's going to keep spawning or something. You might just notice that in your scenario setup that there's a really great opportunity for a turn 1 Crushing Weight top with No Remorse bottom. So, and in a short scenario where potentially it is a single room scenario or a scenario where if you can do that quickly, you will drastically shorten the clock and the amount of stamina required as a party to be able to complete the scenario by doing something very impactful like that. So it will be worth it for you. Next, we have Destructive Fury, a card that I really, really wanted to be good. I really, really wanted to do this. I mean, I was looking for a big burn. Let's burn all of our charges on our Crushing Weight and just try and kill everything type thing. As a Cragheart main, I've always enjoyed Unstable Upheaval and the ability to just wipe a room as quick as possible. And Destructive Fury has that vibe to it where you're thinking, could I use the top of this with Crushing Weight and just go crazy and just burn pretty much all of my charges in a single go? But if I wipe a room, it'd probably be worth it. So yeah, Destructive Fury, unfortunately, I have found, especially a 2-player, maybe because of the less number of enemies, I have not really found the top to be very good at all. I've never really wanted to use it. I've actually, even when I was playing melee, found myself using the bottom fairly regularly, or just as a 19 initiative move too, which is a pretty sad state, to be honest. The top of this card I wish was good. Maybe if you're playing 4-player and again, a certain situation pops up where you can say, actually, if we do this, we could get a fast start in this scenario that could really help us out. So then there may be scenarios where, again, similar to No Remorse, where you look at it and you think, yeah, there's an opportunity here to use it and it will be really good. But ultimately, you may just want to use it as an attack 3 without crushing weight, just to not use all of those charges. You know, there's an option there. The bottom of this is attack 3, range 2 with 3. So this would use 3 charges potentially of precision aim, which I like a little bit more because 3 charges is not all 6 charges in one go, or, well, it would be 5 charges on the top of Destructive Fury, but, you know, 5 charges is a dangerous territory to be in. 3 charges is much more manageable. You can probably try and claw those back with good play over the next couple of rounds. So, yeah, Destructive Fury bottom, I think, is probably the better of the two, as well as it being an attack on the bottom section of a card. So, it gives you that double attack and potentially turn 1 precision aim and the bottom of this. So similar to how No Remorse has that potential for crushing weight top with No Remorse bottom as a burn on the very first turn, you got Destructive Fury, which could potentially be precision aim top and then Destructive Fury bottom on the first turn as like a very impactful way to kind of get yourself started. So yeah, there's some really there's some nice things here, and again, it's going to come down to each individual scenario. I did originally in my playthrough use this card because I was convinced that I needed 19 initiative. I was like, I don't care. I need 19 initiative. I need some more early initiative. So I kind of convinced myself in the playthrough to play with this card. But it became evident pretty quickly that it was a very dud card in my hand a lot of the time. So I ended up dropping it pretty quickly. But that is Destructive Fury. And finally, we have Fortitude, which is a fantastic X card. Probably the best of the bunch, I would say, at least for the way that I like to play. So Fortitude top is an attack 3, PS2, then has, before applying any other bonuses, move the character token on one of your persistent abilities forward 1 slot to make this a ranged attack. So melee attacks as standard are considered to be range 1 for the purposes of sort of range, if you like. So this would actually turn Fortitude into a attack 3 range 3, which would then trigger precision aim as well. So then suddenly you'd be looking at an attack 4 with PS2 at range 4. So very usable on the ranged attack. This is going to be something you're going to want to do definitely with both builds. I think Fortitude top is playable with both sets because as a melee character, I am definitely just using it with as an attack 3 PS2 as a melee attack to trigger crushing weight, which would then give you that +2. So I'm definitely doing that as a melee player, because that's an attack 5 with PS2, and there's a surprising amount of shield in Frosthaven even early on. So shield is definitely something you're going to want to push through and punch through. But being able to potentially consume a charge if you're playing range to be able to make it a super good ranged attack as well with that PS is going to be very useful as well. So Fortitude top for me is actually pretty much an auto include if you're playing any form of just damage build, which, you know, every character needs damage. So yeah, you're pretty much going to do it. The only thing I guess is that with the range build, you do kind of have to give up extra charges, which yeah, is a little bit of a downside, but hopefully you can mitigate those and get them back through your other abilities anyway. 31 initiative is okay. I found this initiative to be fairly playable to try and go after some of my allies sometimes, but also sometimes before some enemies. The bottom is whenever you kill an enemy, move the character token back on one of your persistent abilities backwards 1 slot. Now this is a burn. Obviously, this is much more designed for an aggressive build. You might be playing an aggressive ranged build. You might be playing a support ranged build that sort of uses the healing a lot more. So depends on really what you're doing. If you're playing melee, you are most likely definitely playing aggressive. I do feel like burning the bottom of this though, like the opportunity cost of losing that top action to me has just not been worth it. It's just really not been worth it. I want an attack 3 with PS2 if I'm playing melee. I probably want that if I'm playing ranged as well. So I just feel like the opportunity, you know, of cost of losing the top of Fortitude is not really paid off by the bottom. This is the type of card that will probably make it all the way to the end of the scenario for you. Yeah, I like thematically where the bottom is at. I like the idea of you being able to, and of course, your eyes will probably light up the first time that you look at this ability and think, oh yeah, that sounds really good, and surely I can get loads of charges. Yes, but you're giving up one of your best attacks in order to do so, which I really don't advise. So at least now at this level, at level 1, I think you want to be playing Fortitude for the top, definitely. And this card will be the only X card, really, of the 3 that I would say you definitely want to include pretty much with any build, just because the top action is so strong. Okay, so there are all of my thoughts on the level 1 and X cards. What I'll do now is I'll put up on screen some of the kind of suggested cards that I would say this is what like a melee drifter kind of looks like a level 1. As with all of my guides going forward in Frosthaven, it's going to be very difficult for me to be able to tell you guys exactly which cards to play, because you will find out through the scenario design, or maybe you have already, that each scenario is so unique in Frosthaven in the way that it presents itself and the challenges that it throws at your party that it's incredibly difficult for me to say you should always use these cards. I think the Drifter is a character who's a little bit more cut and dry, but certainly a lot of the unlockable characters, certainly some of the other starters, really do need to mix their cards up fairly regularly. And even the Drifter here, which I think is on the low scale of needing to do that, you still have quite a few different options there that you could do, that you could bring in. So yeah, I'm going to avoid telling you this is the card to take out. And as we go forward to the level 2 cards and beyond, I'm going to avoid saying to you, you should take out this card for this card. We're just going to discuss the cards and we're going to choose which one we're taking. And then I think it's going to be down to you and the scenario that you're playing to be able to really critically do that. So this is a good thing, in my opinion. It really means that no card is useless. It also means that as players, we can have much more vibrant discussions around cards rather than it being this card is better than that card 100%. There's no question about it. I feel like it's really going to lead to a lot more interesting discussion around cards in the future as well. So don't see this as a bad negative thing in any way, you know, or anything. I can always give you advice in the comments down below if you specifically want me to talk about, well, this card or that card. I can give you some pluses and minuses for it, but I'm not going to say this is the card that you take out, because to me it just feels like that's not going to be the case. You know, that you're going to potentially turn around and say, well, my party consists of this, this, and this, and actually I find this card to be very good. So it's ill-advised, and that would be me giving you some bad advice. So we won't be doing that. But here are all of my level 1 cards of what my kind of typical drifter setup would look like, if you like, if we're just going into a scenario pretty blind, and that and what I would recommend is like a starting point, if you like, and then you can obviously mix and match a little bit. For your starting items for the Drifter, I do really like the recommendations that they make in the book for the items to buy. So buying yourself an Amulet of Life works really well with continuous health, but also wing shoes is also just a really good addition to this character, who can quite often, especially at low levels, get a decent amount of movement but might struggle with difficult terrain, hazardous terrain, or traps, and dealing with those. In terms of craftable items that are available only at the level 1 craftsman, I'm not going to go into any additional items here because Frosthaven will vary wildly here, but what's available to begin with for you, I would say that if you're playing the melee version, then I would consider using Crude Hide Armor and Crude Spear. Both of them really great items. Crude Hide Armor is just a simple armor item, so make sure that you get that perk point before you get it though, because you will need the Ignore Negative Item Effects perk. So make sure you get that one first, so maybe not the first thing to buy. And then Crude Spear, just giving you a little bit of extra kind of range on your melee, so it just gives you a bit of reach on a melee character where normally you might struggle a little bit. So it just gives you that flexibility. I really like it. I think it's just a super handy little thing to have in your back pocket for when you need it. If you're playing the ranged version of this character, I think you're probably going to be looking at Crude Bow as your hand item. Gives you some extra range, although you do have naturally some range extension anyway through some of your abilities. In terms of other items that you can get for range, I would suggest Traveling Cloak as your starting item, just to give yourself a little bit of extra health. You know, there's no real harm in doing it. It's 1 hide. It's very simple to craft and use. If you're not using the Amulet of Life trick with continuous health, then I think you probably want to go for a Spyglass as your head slot item here. It's going to fit more naturally into the ranged build for sure, to give yourself a bit of advantage, hopefully get a little bit more damage in. Okay, so let's go to the level 2 cards. So first up, we have Shockwave. We have on your next 6 melee attacks targeting an enemy adjacent to any other enemy, 1 enemy adjacent to the target suffers 2 damage. 6 charges, as with all of your charge-based abilities. I think pretty much all of them, if not all of them, are 6. But obviously very, very strong here and very much tailored to the melee build. Being able to do an additional 2 damage, like splash damage, if you like, onto a different enemy can be so strong when dealing with enemies with high shield, because it's pure damage, enemies that have retaliate, so you can kind of like get a little bit of damage on them, bit of cheeky damage on them, not taking retaliate, and then potentially on the next turn you could follow up and attack them and kill them, so again you wouldn't take the retaliate damage. It gives you some really nice play. This is also the only card really that I would say that the melee drifter gets that is kind of pseudo AoE type abilities, so that you can actually deal with a larger amount of enemies at once. There are a few cards that you get as you level up that give you that, but realistically there's not many opportunities as the melee. You're a bit more of a single target kind of person. You get a few cards here and there that give you the opportunity to kind of spread damage around. This is one of them. I really like the top of Shockwave. It is a natural fit for crushing weight. It is a it's an absolutely slam dunk kind of ability. Now the timing of when you want to play this though is going to be a little bit odd. I don't necessarily think that this is something that you want to play immediately. Of course, this is a top, so you couldn't play it on turn 1 alongside crushing weight without some other kind of help. So it's going to be difficult for you to get them both going maybe immediately. I actually quite like Shockwave being played a little bit later in the scenario, maybe after room 1, or maybe when you get a nice breather between your rest cycles. So after you've done your full 1 playthrough, all of your cards, maybe on your second playthrough you would use it. The bottom of this card is actually excellent as well as the initiative being excellent for early use. You've got move 3, shield 1, which is actually just incredibly solid for the melee build as well, allowing you to move into range of enemies with that move 3. It's a decent amount of movement. That shield 1 protecting yourself as well. So if you wanted to really run into the middle of a room and start hitting things, you've got that kind of a little bit of reassurance there that you've got some shield to hopefully mitigate some of the damage. It's a very solid ability. There are Gloomhaven characters with similar abilities to this. I would play them every single time if I was that style of character, so it does not change here. That's one thing that does remain consistent from Gloomhaven to Frosthaven. Move and shield on an early initiative, especially on a melee character, is always going to be fantastic. So Shockwave, I love this card for the melee build, and it will be an easy pick. But the good thing about the Drifter here is that you'll often be presented with the opportunity to say we're either taking this card or this card, depending if we're playing melee or ranged. The level up decisions can sometimes be they can be very clear depending on how you're playing. So the other card is Ever Forward. It is attack 2, range 3. So again, naturally, probably going to be for the range build. It's also got regenerate self, which is quite nice. So regenerate is that it's like the opposite of wound. It's at the beginning of your turn, you will heal 1, but at any point once you take damage, the regenerate will fall off. So kind of like the opposite to wound in that it gives you a heal, but I guess like the opposite to poison in the sense that it kind of will get fallen off by damage, something like that. But actually a pretty usable ability, very kind of a nice, concise ability. The regenerate self is a little bit odd, I would say, because if you're playing ranged, you might not always be under fire. But of course, there are loads of enemies in Frosthaven that have multi-target attacks. There's some particular nasty ones that attack everybody at very long range. You know, I'm not going to ruin that enemy, but I've mentioned it several times and I really dislike it. But yeah, there are enemies that can attack you at very long range and attack everybody. So regenerate self can actually be quite nice to keep you topped up. And certainly in terms of value, you know, you chuck this on potentially before a long rest as well, and then you long rest, then you get that heal, and then you get the heal from this, and it just stays there really, and keeps healing you up. But obviously, I think regenerating an ally might be a little bit more useful, but you will be able to run away and maybe hide and get a few rounds of that regenerate at least. So that's good. At the bottom is heal 1, target 3 at range 3. 67 initiative. This is excellent. Actually, just really excellent. It's actually a very good ability, I think, regardless of what kind of build you're playing, because of the different applications that it has. I mean, being able to just heal 3 things for 1 is going to potentially remove poison off of 3 targets if it was a bad scenario condition. Like I said about brittle, some enemies will apply brittle, but also some enemies will, some scenarios, sorry, will have brittle as a negative scenario condition. So there's a really good opportunity here for you to just be able to chuck a heal that might not be a large amount, but it clears poison, it clears wound, it clears brittle. Just really, really cool. Clears Bane as well. The Bane is not something that we see super regularly, but also clears Bane. So yeah, really, really useful thing to have. I think that the bottom of this is actually just a super good ability regardless, completely on its own. But for me, Shockwave is the natural choice as the melee drifter and the way that I like to play. But Ever Forward is also the natural choice if you're playing the ranged build. So I feel like at level 2, you got a very nice clear-cut decision here depending on your playstyle. Okay, onwards to level 3. So at level 3, we have Fierce Barrage, which is an attack 2 and a little 2 hex pattern there in front of you. Very, very nice for crushing weight. Potentially you could attack 2 things here for 4. Really nice. I said before, like with Shockwave, we don't get loads and loads of options for multi-target. And if we do get multi-target, we need to be a little bit careful sometimes about, you know, how many things we're targeting and how many charges we're using. You got to kind of consider that. But this could potentially do attack 4 on 2 enemies. Also, if you have Shockwave up, they would trigger against each other as well. So potentially you could get 2 triggers of your Shockwave to do 2 damage to those 2 enemies as well. So it naturally flows very well into the previous card that we just picked, I found. So Fierce Barrage top, really excellent. Nice bit of AoE, gives you some more tools in the bag. Cards like this, similar to actually the level 2 card that we looked at, which was Ever Forward with that heal target 3. Cards like this do slightly diminish a little bit at 2-player. You know, lots of cards that multi-target things. Of course, if there's only 2 of you, do you really need a target 3 and vice versa? So with Fierce Barrage at 2-player, you may find that actually like higher priority targets and things like that are at the backs of rooms and they're kind of hanging out on their own. But even at 2-player, I found you can pretty reliably get a nice little attack with this on 2 things. The bottom of this, though, is very solid for the ranged build, which is on your next 6 ranged abilities, add +1 target. So being able to increase the number of things you're targeting. Now, this is, of course, very strong. It basically reads double damage, if you think about it that way. Of course, if there's only 1 enemy on the board, it doesn't really work. But if there's multiple enemies and you can target them all, then yeah, this is almost like doubling your damage, really, in essence. Very, very good, but also very scary because you're going to start racing through even more charges of precision aim. This is why I feel like the melee build is maybe a bit better than the ranged build, or at least a bit more consistent than the ranged build, because the ranged build really is racing through those charges at times. So you have to be very careful because, of course, this adds that extra target, which then if you have precision aim is going to have another trigger of that. So similar to, I guess, Fierce Barrage top, which would trigger sort of two lots of crushing weight, potentially. This could trigger another precision aim. So suddenly it's kind of like 3 charges, right? You got the charge from the bottom of Fierce Barrage, and then you've got 2 charges from precision aim. So yeah, you'll end up really using a lot of charges, but there will be situations where you kind of have the freedom to go crazy with the drifter, so might not necessarily be a huge problem. But again, it's just something that I like to draw people's attention to, that the range build in general does burn through charges, or potentially could burn through charges much quicker if you do go with this. But you don't have to necessarily play it on the first turn. I know it's on the bottom and it feels very nice to maybe similar to how the melee drifter will go crushing weight and then continuous health on the first turn. That's their top and bottom action. Does feel like maybe you go precision aim and then the bottom of Fierce Barrage on the first turn is the ranged, if you're going for a ranged damage. You know, that does feel quite nice. A nice way to get 2 very strong kind of active abilities out onto the battlefield, charge-based abilities out onto the battlefield on the first turn. The other card is Jewel Bow, which is attack 2, target 2, range 3, 26 initiative, decent initiative there, 32 initiative on Fierce Barrage on the previous card, which is sort of pretty similar, to be honest. The bottom is move the character token on 2 of your persistent abilities backwards 4 slots. This is a burn, though, so this is a big reset. Now this is a situation where actually I feel like both of these cards speak pretty heavily to the ranged build. Both of them really look like cards that the ranged build wants. The bottom of Fierce Barrage, but the top and bottom of Jewel Bow I mean, the clue is in the name, folks. It says dual bow. You're probably going to want it on a ranged build. Whereas the melee is much more looking at just the top of Fierce Barrage as a potential good ability for them. I don't feel like the bottom of dual bow is particularly useful for the melee build. Like the other ones that we had, it is better that this is at least on the bottom, so we're not maybe giving up a turn of attacking to be able to do this. So, you know, there are some nice situations where potentially you could just do a really big attack maybe, and then use the bottom of dual bow burn to just kind of erase all of those charges that you just used. You know, there is definitely an option there, so there is some use of it there, I think, with the with the melee build. But ultimately, I found it quite easy to control my charges with the melee drifter. I've never really struggled too much as long as you're playing well with the different cards that you have. So for me, this is as a melee drifter, I'm taking Fierce Barrage here at level 3. I think it's it's just a really nice, good value attack and give us some nice kind of AoE clear, the ability to potentially do a lot of damage to 2 things in one turn, especially with Shockwave that we might have just picked up. If you're playing range, though, this is much more of a difficult decision on maybe which one you go for first. I have a feeling that you may be coming back for the other one that you did not take, because both of these are really something you're very interested in if you're playing ranged. I guess as just a consistent damage dealer, the top of dual bow, that attack 2, target 2, range 3, you know, that's going to turn into an attack 3, target 2, range 4. That's very reliable attack. So you'll definitely be able to hit those 2 targets with range 4. So I guess if I was to push into making a decision right now at level 3, if I was playing ranged, I would probably pick up dual bow first. And then maybe go for the bottom of Fierce Barrage, mainly because I feel like dual bow, both the top and bottom, have good applications straight away for the ranged build, whereas I feel like the bottom of Fierce Barrage, although it very much does, it's more all in, and you might find that actually, you know, adding that later, then the bottom of dual bow is even better because now you have Fierce Barrage. So yeah, I feel like you don't want to run before you can walk, if you like, and dual bow top is just very consistent. So yeah, Fierce Barrage if you're playing melee, I think, and dual bow if you're playing ranged. So level 4, we have Gift of the Prey, which is an attack 3, range 3. If you killed an enemy with the attack ability, move the character token on one of your persistent abilities backwards 1 slot. So this is kind of like the level 1 card that we had for the melee drifter, but now in ranged form. So now if we kill, we can get that charge back. Bloodletting was the name of the melee version. This is the ranged version. You've had to wait a while until level 4, but this is incredibly solid. Of course, potentially you'll be using that precision aim to be able to attack for 4 at range 4 anyway. Hopefully that will kill them. If it does, then great. You'll then be able to move that charge back. So, you know, it's very clear and obvious here at level 4 that Gift of the Prey top is just excellent for the ranged build, really. The bottom is move 4. If you killed an enemy this round, move the character token on one of your persistent abilities backwards 1 slot. Now that ability is actually super useful for any of the 2 builds, really. Both the melee build and the range build will probably have some nice use out of it. I think both of them are, you know, decent builds at being able to kill stuff in a very reliable way, in a very quick way. It's a way to get charges back, not to mention that it is just a move 4 as well. You know, as I said, I don't love burning the plus move persistent ability on the drifter. There are certain scenarios where you feel like you have to and you need to. And if you want to go after masteries and things like that, then yes, you probably do need to use it. But if you are the kind of, you are playing relatively an average scenario, I've actually found that I've not really needed to burn that additional move. I've been okay. So this is something to maybe consider here. Like, do you really, you know, is a move 4 just flat going to be enough? Which I think it probably is, or it will be for you. So I think this is great. This is a very good card. Difficult decision now, because of course you kind of were thinking about maybe going back for the other level 3 if you're playing ranged. But you got Gift of the Prey hanging out here, which is also very, very good. So yeah, tough choice for sure. The other card is Chunk of Flesh, and this kind of makes our mind up for us, though, I think, as a melee player. The top is an attack 2, heal 2, range 1. Move the character token on one of your persistent abilities backwards 1 slot. 62 initiative. Obviously, the top of this card is just, I mean, it does absolutely everything that you want if you are playing the crushing weight and continuous health build, essentially, because it's just an attack 4, heal 4 on a card, which is pretty nuts, you know, in terms of raw power level of ability. That's up there, right? That's very, very good. So yeah, you can obviously not necessarily target yourself, but you could, of course, target yourself to do it. You probably will if you're playing melee. Also, just moving a character token back as well, and it's unconditional moving a token back, right? You look at Gift of the Prey, it's a very solid card, but you still have to get that kill on both the top and bottom. You have to have had an enemy die, and of course, you can get unlucky in Frosthaven, just like you could in Gloomhaven. You draw your miss, you draw like a -2, -1. You know, there are going to be times when you aren't going to kill an enemy when you think you're going to kill an enemy. Chunk of the Flesh just ignores all of that. Hey, you can attack for 4, you can heal for 4, and guess what? You get to move one of those tokens back as well in the process. It's absolutely insane. It is perfect for the melee build, and if you're playing those two cards, perfect. Even if you're not playing continuous health, I would say just being able to maybe use crushing weight to attack for 4, heal yourself maybe just for 2, but then move the token back on something like your shield or your retaliate or your move or whatever is also just super valuable. So even if you're not necessarily doing a heal 4, you're only doing a heal 2, it's still super good value. So excellent top action. 62 initiative is, yeah, not great though. It's a bit of a, you know, it's in no man's land, if you like, of initiatives, I like to say, where it's kind of like somewhere in the mix, but you don't really know when, and there's no guarantees. The bottom is on the next 6 sources of damage from attacks targeting you, gain shield 2. Also a very nice potential ability for a melee character, or of course if you're playing the hardcore kind of tanking build. I don't really love the hardcore tanking build, because you have to wait this long to be able to get this kind of effect. So you'll have to be kind of just using the shield 1 for a long time. And then, of course, you've got a couple of cards that will give you additional shield for the round, but I don't love it. But the bottom of this is actually a pretty useful ability to have in certain scenarios, in certain situations. It could end up winning you a scenario where you just need to survive one more round, potentially, and you burn the bottom of this and you get shield 2. You know, that could be really clutch in certain areas and situations. So Chunk of Flesh, really great card. Really fantastic card for the melee. You absolutely snap it up. I did actually, in my playthrough, I went for Gift of the Prey, funnily enough, because a lot of people were like, go Chunk of Flesh. And I was thinking, well, actually, I would like to try and play a bit more of a hybrid build. But I actually found that by going for Gift of the Prey bottom, I didn't end up really getting the trigger as much as I wanted to on that kill. The move 4 was incredibly useful, but I did find that I didn't really get that trigger as much as I would have loved. So yeah, it just didn't work out so well for me. Chunk of Flesh, I think, is excellent, really good, and yeah, you're gonna want to use it as much as possible. Definitely the correct choice if you're playing melee. If you're playing range, you now have a difficult decision. Do you go for Gift of the Prey or do you go back? There may be other opportunities to go back later on for you, though, depending on what kind of cards you want to go for. So, you know, I think Gift of the Prey is incredibly solid. So it's certainly not a bad choice. It's a very good choice here. So you probably will end up taking Gift of the Prey on the ranged build here, and then maybe look for an opportunity to go back for Fierce Barrage a little bit later on, maybe on the ranged. So here we are at level 5. We've got a Breakthrough, which is attack for PS2. Before applying any other bonuses, move the character token on one of your persistent abilities forward 1 slot to add wound. So similar to the one with Pierce, that we could maybe move a charge forward to be able to add the range to the ability. We've got one here that allows us to do a similar kind of thing, but adds wound instead. Of course, this is kind of like a strict upgrade, really. It goes from an attack 3 to an attack 4. It keeps that PS2, and now we have the option of adding wound, which is much more attractive than adding range for us if we're playing the melee build. Love Breakthrough top. I think it's just a super nice upgrade. Of course, if you do have crushing weight up, and it's going to be +2 to that attack, so it's going to be attack 6 with PS2 and with wound if you give up an extra charge on something. what's not to love. So there are quite a few enemies. I will say this, there are quite a few enemies in Frosthaven that are immune now. So you'll notice that regular enemies will be immune to different things. Some of them are immune to wounds. Some of them are immune to poison. Some of them are immune to things like disarm and stun. So there are definite differences in the enemies that you will be facing. And although wound in Gloomhaven terms was always like slam dunk, there will be scenarios that you play where wound is very rubbish, very not playable. So that is something to consider here. But realistically, I mean, attack 6 is always playable, so you're going to be playing this regardless. 34 initiative is okay as an initiative, not super good. You can see where I'm coming from with the kind of average to okay initiatives here with the Drifter. The Drifter does just feel like a little bit of a mess of initiatives, probably to do with how powerful a lot of their abilities are. You know, they're going to need to be able to keep themselves alive a little bit. They're going to be in danger occasionally, and they're not going to always be able to execute their plan. Some of the difficulty with the Drifter is going to come through the initiative control rather than the actual abilities, which kind of play themselves for the most part at times. The bottom is move 4. If you're adjacent to at least 2 enemies, move the character token back on one of your persistent abilities 1 slot. So again, super, super useful. Really nice, big move there, which is good. Also, potentially being able to get some tokens back. Not to mention, this works really well again with all of the previous cards that we've picked, right? When we look at the cards that we took before. So if you want to look at Shockwave, you know, you want to be next to enemies to trigger Shockwave. You want 2 enemies to be next to each other for Shockwave. So that's going to work. You look at Fierce Barrage. That's an attack 2 on 2 things next to you. So again, you're going to be wanting to do that. So breakthrough into Barrage with Shockwave up just feels super good. Really, really good. Love this card. I think it's, again, a super powerful slam dunk kind of card. And you'll notice just the general values on the Drifter are just kind of starting to like just rise a little bit, making your life a bit easier as you go up the levels. You know, your attacks are suddenly a little bit more like their base values are going up. Really, we're not getting as many different kind of actual passive abilities. Like our charge based abilities are not necessarily changing loads. We're not adding 1 every single level up. It's actually our kind of attack, raw kind of attack actions or move actions, you know, ranged attack actions, heal actions, all of those things that actually are improving, so that they're, you know, the base modifier of that crushing weight with +2 isn't really going to get improved, but it's going to be +2 to other attacks that are higher value. So the other card is Survivalist, which is on your next 6 heals, targeting figures without ward. Add ward. So ward is a new mechanic that was added in, I think it's in Frosthaven. It might have been in Forgotten Circles, but I think Regenerate was in Forgotten Circles. So this would be Frosthaven for the first time. Ward is basically half damage on the next source of damage that you take. So this can be quite good if an enemy, you know, if an enemy draws ×2 against you, then basically it goes, nope, you know, cut that in half. So that's really, really good. Some nice kind of insurance against ×2 draws. Does, however, trigger on things like wound. You know, wound would trigger it, which kind of like sucks, really. Not the best use of it. So there can be situations like that. Can counter brittle quite nicely, so there's some good use there. But it is basically a tanking ability that you're going to want to just chuck onto whoever your frontliner is. This is definitely a support ability. It is unlikely that you use it on yourself, but I guess you could if you were really just wanted to sit there and do really not much except for heal yourself, shield yourself, and ward yourself, sure. But I don't know if that would be a very exciting way of playing the game. Personally, I like playing characters that run around and at least play attacks. So, I don't know. But yeah, for a support build, yeah, this is kind of okay. I think it's maybe slightly underwhelming, depending. But at least this is at a point where the enemies are starting to get more tricky. There are some definite difficulty spikes in monster difficulty at the higher levels. As soon as your scenario level, I think we were looking at it before, and I think it's somewhere around 5 actually. Scenario level 5-ish. There's a really big spike in difficulty with some of the monsters. So, you know, ward or at level 1 doesn't feel great because, of course, enemies are attacking you for like 1 or 2, and it doesn't really feel that impactful. But ward when an enemy is attacking you for 5, 6, 7 does feel good. So, you know, there's some definite application at higher levels for ward. The bottom here is move 2, loot 1, and then heal X self. So where X is twice the number of tokens and tiles looted. So this could be a nice all-in-one loot action for you. I said before with the level 1s that looting is pretty important in Frosthaven. You might eventually stop looting. You know, at this point in time, we may have gotten rid of our loot card because we're struggling to find space for all of our other great cards that we now have. So certain cards like that will probably go away. But move 2, loot 1, and heal. Let's say if you were to play this pretty well, you'd have 2 tokens. Probably somewhere in the region of 1.5 to 2 tokens. I bet you the average would be about 1.5. So possibly you'd be healing yourself for 2 or 4. Somewhere like that. So 2 or 4 heal, obviously quite good, actually. As a single thing, you wouldn't actually need continuous health to make this any better. I think healing yourself for 4 is pretty good. If you just end up looting, 1 token and healing yourself for 2, that could just be a good way of removing poison from you. Late initiative as well can be very useful for this type of thing, because of course, if allies manage to kill some enemies for you and they're like, yeah, don't worry, I'm going to kill them, then of course you could move, loot the tokens that they've just dropped, as well as get a nice big heal out of it as well. So yeah, not bad. 91 very late initiative allows you to go super late. So in terms of initiative, this is definitely the better of the 2 cards, but breakthrough to me is just very good. This could be the situation where if you are playing the ranged build, you can go back for that other level 3 that you did not take. In fact, that would be exactly what I would probably advise if you are playing the ranged build. Go back and take Fierce Barrage if you didn't, or Dual Bow if you took Fierce Barrage first. But I would absolutely go and do that, because there isn't really anything on offer here for you. So level 6, we have Consume Stamina, which is attack 2 at range 4. Heal X, range 4, where X is the amount of damage suffered by targets of the attack ability. Importantly there, it says targets. So if you could change this into a multi-target attack, then potentially it could be a massive heal. If you could attack, let's say you're attacking 2 things, you have both precision aim and you had Fierce Barrage up, so you're going to be attacking 2 things for 3 at range 5. Suddenly, especially if you've got a decent attack modifier deck, if you can get advantage on one of those attacks, or you have strengthen, suddenly you could be healing a bunch. You could be healing 6+, easily 6+ damage onto someone. Really good. That will get most characters up to full health, at least some of the smaller glass cannony type characters. But yeah, your tank is certainly going to be thankful for you if you can do that. And it's a big range on the heal as well. Very flexible card here. Really like the kind of design of this particular ability, because it does a bit of everything. Like we had Chunk of Flesh for the melee build, where we could kind of do everything. This is kind of like the version here for the range build, where you can kind of just have a very impactful turn. This is the type of card that you will lean on very heavily at times, I feel. So really like the top of Consume Stamina, and a great kind of hybrid card. Instead of having to trade off doing damage for healing, you're getting to do both, which I really love. 21 initiative, very nice usable early initiative as well. Move 2, retaliate 2. Whenever an adjacent enemy dies this round, move the character token on one of your position abilities backwards 1 slot. Now, this was an ability that I did actually try a little bit out on my melee drifter, because it felt like, yeah, if I can move, if I have an early initiative, I can move in, I can attack something, I can chuck retaliate up, then suddenly, if enemies are dying to that retaliate damage, or if allies are like killing them as well, then suddenly I'm going to be able to potentially move a token back a huge amount. So it did happen, but I would say it didn't happen as often as I was maybe hoping or expecting. Maybe that's down to more of my party setup, only playing 2. If you're playing with 3 characters or 4 characters, of course, there's going to be way more enemies on the board, so potentially way more opportunities for you to get charges back. So certainly an ability like this, which is just it doesn't actually count how many charges or instances you can do it. It's just, hey, for this round, whenever an enemy dies, that's very open-ended. So in certain scenarios where there's lots of like swarming style enemies as well, you could potentially just go crazy with shockwave and things like that to be able to just do damage, kill things, get the charges back. Really satisfying kind of gameplay loop there. But at 2-player, I didn't find it happening quite as much as I would have loved. But it's certainly very, very strong and very, very good. And Retaliate is just free damage, folks. You know, don't turn down free damage potentially, especially if you've got really big heals to just heal yourself right back up again on the next round. The other card is Accurate Strikes. On your next 6 attacks targeting enemies with shield, add Pierce 3. So a new kind of potential, ability to come in, or with charge, a new charge-based active ability that could come in. Does sound relatively good, you know, on the surface, being able to just add PS3. But the thing is that we've already probably taken 2 cards, both with Breakthrough, and we have PS on our level 1 or our X card, right? So we've probably already doing okay. I believe there's also some perks that can add some PS for the Drifter. I just don't... Although there are certain scenarios where this would be very good, and it would be like, yeah, this particular card will just make this enemy type obsolete, basically. You know, completely counters a certain enemy type, like a Flame Demon or someone like that. Wind Demons, you know, all of those guys who just have natural shield. It is just going to counter them super hard. And I will say that a lot of enemies do have shield in Frosthaven. It is quite common, actually, I found. So there's a bunch of shield for you to be able to use PS with. But again, is it a little bit too niche for a pick, especially like at level 6, when you're kind of looking, going, you know, we're looking for big power swings here. Is it really going to give you that? It certainly helps you deal with certain types of enemy, which is again why I'm very, very reluctant to write off cards, because there's also scenario conditions that you come in that give shield to enemies as well. There's a lot of different things that scenarios can really throw into the mix. So although on the surface, you know, we're looking at this and saying, okay, well, yeah, it doesn't feel great. If you were at a certain point in the campaign, like if you are going into, I think it's Crystal Trench, I can't remember. It's the scenario that gave me a lot of issues. If I had Accurate Strikes, that scenario would have been an absolute breeze, and I would not have worried about it whatsoever. So again, it's kind of interesting in Frosthaven how even if you think, not necessarily, I want to go get this card, you will probably be able to find a really good justification for any card at any point, certain points in the scenarios and your campaign. So yeah, it's a really difficult one to kind of evaluate, really. But I personally have found that I had enough PS through my other cards to get through, you know, and then when I did maybe have a scenario where this would have been super, super good, yeah, it was tough, but I found a way to get through it. So yeah, that's my personal kind of feeling on it. A 56 initiative is sort of right slap down the middle, so yeah, not particularly usable as a leading initiative, I would say. The bottom is move 2 with gain advantage on all your attacks this round, and that's probably why this initiative is not super attractive, because that bottom ability does sound very attractive, especially if you're playing ranged build, actually. So it's funny because the ranged build's got another situation here where you're like, damn it, I just want this, because you are going to be doing multi-target attacks on ranged. Melee, you will be potentially as well, but not as much. You know, we're going to maybe have, I guess you could try and bring back Destructive Fury for a bit of fun, to try and do like some huge advantage attack against a bunch of stuff. There's some fun there. There's definitely something you could do. But ranged is probably the one that's more consistently going to be attacking 2, 3, 4 targets very, you know, pretty consistently. You know, even draining arrows, you might consider using draining arrows and have a big attack with this. So yeah, there's a difficult choice here, I think, for the ranged build, because the bottom will give you that much needed consistency, I think, that you will want. I mean, you are level 6, depending on what perks you've gone for. The fun thing with Frosthaven is that with all of the additional perks that don't actually add to your attack deck, you know, they are like abilities that kind of change the way you interact with the game. The Drifter, for example, can modify the loot cards that they draw, right? You can kind of interact with that mechanic a little bit differently, or you could equip another item, so another single-handed item. It's an interesting dynamic, because players may go for those perks, and when you do, that means that you're not going for perks that were increasing your attack modifier deck, right, and making that better. So there's going to be a period of time that even when you're in like a level 6, unless you're like consistently smashing your battle goals, which you may be, so you're doing quite well. There's going to be situations when actually you might turn around and say, well, actually advantage, yeah, it's good, but honestly, it's not great. You know, it's not going to be as good as it could be because of the perks that I've taken and the different decisions that you've made with your perks, right? There's a big variety of perks that you can take. So I think it's very interesting because the discussion has definitely changed in terms of how good is advantage and perks and what perks you take, because it is not so cut and dry anymore, especially with the changes as well to the rules for advantage and rolling modifiers and stuff like that. But obviously advantage is still going to be very, very strong. It guarantees that you don't miss, which could be super, super clutch and important in a certain in a certain situation and against certain enemies. You just cannot draw a negative modifier or a miss. It will just ruin you and you'll lose. So, you know, that advantage is always going to be great for that reason alone. So, difficult choice here. I think if I'm playing the melee build, I'm probably thinking about taking... It's a difficult choice. I think I would probably go for like consume stamina for the bottom. If I'm playing like at 3 and 4 mercenaries, I feel like that could just be really, really good. And you're playing... certainly if you're playing a tank build as well, you definitely want the bottom of this as well, I would say. But if you are... if you're playing melee and you're playing maybe with 3 or 4 mercenaries, probably want to maybe go with the bottom there. If you're playing ranged, I think you got difficult decision here. Both of them are excellent. Consume stamina might be the safer pick here in terms of like it's a usable ability, but possibly accurate strikes. If you find that you've already doing enough damage, or sorry, not enough damage, but you're already doing enough attacks, like you have enough attack abilities, and you don't think that maybe the heal is going to be super, super useful on the consume stamina top, I could see a world in where you would try and justify the bottom of accurate strikes. This is going to be I think down to a personal choice depending on who you're playing, what your play style is, who your other mercenaries are in your party, how many of them are in your party. There's a very big choice to be had here between these, but I think for the melee, I am mainly looking here at the bottom of consume stamina or the bottom of accurate strikes as the main thing. You might go for accurate strikes just because of the fact that the top of accurate strikes has the occasional scenario where it's just MVP can potentially make something incredibly trivial. So possibly then I would maybe look to accurate strikes actually instead, but it's a very, very tough choice. So at level 7, we have Like the Wind. Immediately after your next 6 heal abilities, perform a move 3 jump. Super nice. Interesting that this is on the top as well, right? So kind of competes a little bit with Crushing Weight in terms of like a turn 1 play, but would allow us to play Continuous Health, which is a bottom action. So we could go Like the Wind, Continuous Health, and we've already got the combo, which means that we're going to be getting free movements, which is really, really good. If we had more bottom attacks, I would say, yeah, this is like super, super amazing, because then we could, in theory, try and trigger some free stuff. But with Amulet of Life here, you can basically get a free trigger, and this is a really clever way. If you've played Gloomhaven, you will know. I will sort of spoil slightly here a higher prosperity item. So if you don't want to hear about this high prosperity item, then just, turn off for like 30 seconds. But essentially what this allows you to do is a build your own Ring of Haste, right? It's allowing you to get a free move action and basically kind of get 3 actions in one. And the way that you would do that is you use Amulet of Life to give yourself a heal action for free, right? And then you convert that heal action, or you on the back of that heal action, you then also get to use this movement, right? So it's kind of like a build your own Ring of Haste, because Ring of Haste allows you to play the bottom ability of a card, so you can kind of play 3 cards or 3 abilities, sorry. Well, 3 cards, yeah, bottom of 2 and the top of 1. So it's really cool. Plus you can kind of choose when you trigger it as well, because you have the ability to choose when you want to use that Amulet of Life trigger to make it happen. So I really like the Wind for like the combo kind of potential that has, and being able to build that interesting kind of situation. Not to mention you could do it multiple times, because you could use healing potions as well, or potentially, some of your other abilities that you have move and heal, or attack, and you've got attack and heal, right? If you took the level, is it the level 4 card? Let me find it. Chunk of Flesh, there you go. So Chunk of Flesh will also potentially trigger this, and then you get to move. Like, oh, it's a combo player's dream, this card, So definitely something to to think about, and you should be probably licking your lips a little bit, seeing all of the crazy combinations of things you can do. 77 initiative is kind of late, but doesn't really matter if we're playing the top, right? The bottom is move 3 for each ally moved through. During the move ability, move the character token on one of your persistent abilities backwards 1 slot. So this could be really, really nice at 3 and 4, I would say. Also, if you have increased move, then you could potentially move for like 5 here, which could be really, really good. And maybe get, you know, let's say 3 was probably like sort of magical Christmas land. Maybe get like 3 charges back. Super, super useful. That's a big swing. 3 charges back and you get a nice big move. It would be great if it's had jump attached to it, I guess. But if you're having the increased movement from the early level abilities, then potentially it's okay. I mean, this move 2 doesn't add jump or anything. So yeah, it would be really nice if this did have jump, because it would make it a lot easier to use. But I guess then it would probably be a little bit too strong, possibly. But hey, if you can get yourself some wing shoes or some way of giving yourself jump, right? It could be quite good. So move 3 and potentially getting back. Well, it's probably going to be a move 5. I think you want to play it with the move ability, but move 5 and potentially getting yourself 2 to 3 charges back. Maybe you might even get 4. If you get 4, that's crazy. But yeah, that's really quite good. The other level 7 is Unending Fight, which is attack 2, move 3, attack 2. Just very generic kind of ability, but I mean, this is just value. I mean, Drifter is numbers and value the class. So, you know, if you're someone who just likes to see big numbers on the cards, then yeah, all that really happens at the higher levels is the numbers go up, and your flexibility for your positioning and things also goes up. So of course, with Crushing Weight, this is an attack 4, then a move 3, and then an attack 4. Potentially that 3 could be a move 5. I mean, it goes without saying, this is great. Combos well with Shockwave. Very simple, you know, it's very, very simple how to evaluate this card. It's just great if you're playing the melee build. It's just fantastic. As well as giving you the option to maybe use a bottom. You could potentially use something like Continuous Health, for example, right? Or you could use the bottom increased movement one to do that, because it frees up that bottom half of the other card from having to be a movement ability here, because you got that move sandwiched in the middle there. So potentially you could play a nice bottom charge-based card instead as well. You'll retaliate your shield, whatever it might be. So yeah, really, really cool. Unending Fight top. Absolutely love it. 25 initiative. Good usable early initiative as well, but like the Wind is 77, so they're in the same kind of ballpark here of late or early. The bottom is move the character token on 3 of your persistent abilities backwards 3 slots, and this is a burn. Again, like, this is the kind of ability that I don't love, because I've never really, at 2-player, I've never really been in a situation where I've burned through charges so much that I've needed to play a card like this to just reset them. So I have like minimal experience having to use this type of thing, but I'm saying that I still don't feel like, unless maybe you're playing ranged and you really kind of go through those charges, like you motor through those charges for a couple of big turns, I don't really see the value for it on the melee build, because I feel like you're very consistently able to kind of spend 1, get 1 back, spend 1, get 1 back, and then and even when you're losing 1 in that exchange, you're only losing 1 maybe per room. So, you know, by the end of the scenario, you're kind of, you know, maybe you're onto the second row, so you're onto your last 3, but it's really not that much of a big deal. So yeah, I've never really found it to be super useful, but I guess if you wanted to have a huge turn with something like Destructive Fury, then yes, there's an opportunity there to kind of reset all of those charges that you use, or most of those charges that you use. So between these two, I think it's a very difficult choice. You either go for just the straight up value card, I think, on melee build, which is Unending Fight. It's just the straight up value pick, I think. But Like the Wind has some amazingly fun combo potential that allow you to zip around as the Brute. And I actually really like the idea of that. I also quite like the bottom, so difficult choice here. If you are playing on the ranged build here, you might actually not go for either of these two. You might actually go back and take the other level 6 that you didn't get, so that you've got either great consume stamina, or you've got accurate strikes for that bottom move to gain advantage, which also is super good for you. So I feel like if you're playing the melee, you're going to pick one of these two cards, and it's going to really depend on your personal preference. Do you want the card that is just very reliable? And traditionally, when I play increased difficulty on Gloomhaven, although Frosthaven I haven't been able to because the game's too damn hard, I think that I would usually just go for the value card over the could be hilariously combo card. Usually, at least on my first playthrough, because I just want to see how the character does and I want to have a high success in scenarios. But I think it is quite hard to turn down the shenanigans and the silly things you could do with Top of Like the Wind. So level 8, we have Against All Odds, which is attack 1, target all enemies within 2 hexes. For each enemy targeted with the attack ability, move the character token on one of your persistent abilities backwards 1 slot. So this is kind of unstable upheaval. Kind of, right? It's target all enemies within 2 hexes. This is technically a melee attack by the wording of how it is done. So it is not a ranged attack, even though you might think, oh, this sounds, it's a range 2, right? No, it's technically a melee attack. That's how it works. So if you were to use Crushing Weight, and obviously you were to target, let's say, 4 enemies, you could essentially do an attack 3 on 4 enemies here, and then you'd be able to basically get all of those charges back, as long as obviously you've got those charges, you know, that charge does not fall off of the card. That is the trick with Against All Odds. The trick here is to ensure that you've got enough spaces left to be able to actually still push it all the way back. But it could be incredibly powerful when comboed with things like power potions, if you can get advantage. We've already seen a card that we just passed up, right, that can give you advantage. So, you know, there's things you can do. Absolutely. If you did take accurate strikes for that move to gain advantage, not bad. Wow, very, very good, actually. Being able to attack for 3 with advantage on potentially 3 or 4 things, and there being no real downside to it. It's not a burn ability either. This is the kind of thing that you would think would be a burn, but isn't. Absolutely great value. Obviously, if you're playing like a 3 and 4 player, then the value of it goes up between the player counts because there's going to be more enemies to target. But actually, so does the risk. The risk goes up with the more enemies that you target because it's less likely that you could even play it. I have had a situation with Against All Odds before, in which I actually got into a situation where I couldn't use all of the charges. I couldn't really play it because I would use all of my charges, right? And that is a bit of a pitfall that you might fill in, or at least I wasn't like inclined to use it. I was kind of de-incentivized to use it, if you like. So remember that you're going to use all of those charges before you get them back. So you have to have the space on that track to be able to do that, really, if you want to like go crazy with this. But incredibly strong ability. Love it. Absolutely love it. You want this card on the melee build as kind of like, this is almost like a level 9 style ability, like in terms of, I mean, level 8, level 9, pretty close, right? Level 9 and level 8, pretty similar in power level. And this is kind of like your build topper, if you like, on the melee build. So love it. Really, really good. So that's the top of Against All Odds. The bottom is on the next 6 instances of an enemy entering a hex adjacent to you, that enemy suffers 3 damage. And it is 37 initiative. The bottom of this is pretty sweet. I mean, it is, again, just, you know, it's 18 damage, folks. You know, it's nothing to sniff at. It's 18 damage, and that's the floor. You know, the ceiling could be much, much higher if you manage to get the charges back again. So it's quite good, except for the fact that it needs the enemies to actually enter a hex next to you. So, you know, if you're against loads of ranged enemies, they're probably going to be running away from you rather than towards you. So there might be certain enemy types that are difficult to deal with. However, what I will say is in Frosthaven, there is a bunch of movement manipulation, immobilize, obstacles that you can place out by different characters. Like, there is a lot of board manipulation that goes on in Frosthaven in general, much more than in Gloomhaven. It feels like a lot of the traditional control tools have been taken away, like disarm and stun and things like that, or at least made much more premium or rarer. And then you've actually now got movement as being a really important part of like how to control enemies. So I feel like, although it might on the surface seem like, oh, maybe that'll be quite difficult to trigger, there's actually quite a few ways you can do that. Lots of push, lots of pull, lots of things that you can do to make this work. So I don't think you'd struggle too much, especially with some of the unlockable characters paired in. So yeah, I think that this is good. Overall, as an overall card, this is pretty damn excellent for the melee build. Of course, it's absolutely useless for the ranged build. Pretty much absolutely useless, except for potentially using all of the enemies as a way to reset some of your abilities, right? Because you could, in theory, as a ranged, you could spend all of your charges on something else and then use the top of Against All Odds just to reset those charges that you used on a different ability. You don't necessarily have to use the charges of that particular turn, right? You know, you could just get your precision aim charges back. You know, there's things you could do. I think it's a bit cute, but yeah, it is something that you could do. So, but for the most part, I think that you're probably going to be not taking this card on ranged. The other card is Inevitable Conclusion, which is an attack 4 range 2 with this huge AoE pattern. It is a burn, so one-time use. Before applying any other bonuses, move the character token on one of your persistent abilities forward 1 slot to add Immobilize. So this is a pretty top tier kind of attack and control ability rolled into one. If you could do this to a bunch of guards, do a bunch of damage to them, and also just stop them from being able to do anything that round, that could be very, very useful for you. Super useful. So really like the idea of that. I think it's in terms of a burn ability, it's probably the best like one-shot burn that this character really gets. So I like this a lot. It is a burn though, so you know, maybe it's a little bit resource intensive on a character that can sometimes go through a lot of charges. I mean, imagine if you were to hit, let's say on average you were to hit 3 to 4 things with this. I think that's pretty reasonable. A minimum of 3, hopefully 4, I think is what you'll be shooting for with this. That's going to be 3 or 4 charges of your precision aim, potentially. It's going to be, you know, potentially more charges of your increased target as well, Fierce Barrage, because that would also kind of target off of this. So there's, there's weird things that you could end up really going very hard and then have burnt a bunch of cards. But to be honest, this is the kind of card that you could play on the first turn of the game. You could just play this on the first turn without any other charge-based abilities up, just to do a really nice attack 4 and immobilize some really annoying enemies, some really stubborn ones. So, and I would be okay with that. So, Inevitable Conclusion, top, really great value burn, definitely. The bottom here is an attack 3 with poison, and it's melee. So it is an attack on a bottom of a card. It is a melee attack. It's 3 and it's got poison on it. Obviously, poison makes it super interesting because now we could potentially do this, poison something, and then do another attack and make use of that poison straight away. So poison is one of the best, if not the best, extra ability, I think, to find on a bottom attack. It's very, very premium, outside of maybe disarm or stun, of course. But it's very, very good. I really like this in combination with Like the Wind. So we were talking about the kind of build your own combo on Like the Wind top. I feel like if you're going down that route, you absolutely want the bottom of this card because it really just plays into the value of you being able to get free move actions. So strong. Being able to get that attack in, it's going to be great. And at 2-player, possibly it might be the right kind of call, really, because you're going to be dealing with less enemies in general. So it's a tough choice for the melee build because I think both cards have really interesting abilities that you probably want on melee. Ranged, I think it's a lot more cut and dry. Probably want Inevitable Conclusion, or to be honest, you may actually go back and take a previous card as well. You may actually go back and take the other level 7. There's an option there as well. Potentially, you might want to take Unending Fight to just get a big, nice reset at some point. I don't know. It's very difficult. Or of course, you take Like the Wind yourself because you didn't take the level 7s. You went back and took the level 6. So the fun thing about the Drifter here is, especially at these higher levels, there's going to be some going back. And in fact, at level 9, this is going to be really interesting when we get to that card too. So there's definitely great opportunities to go back. If you're playing the range build, I think you either want to take Inevitable Conclusion, or you potentially go back and take Like the Wind at level 7 because you didn't take a level 7 card. or potentially find something else from the lower levels. But I do like the top of Inevitable Conclusion as a nice big burn attack. And then if you're playing melee, I think you've got a very tough decision. If you did take Like the Wind at level 7, then I think that you probably want to go for Inevitable Conclusion because it's just fun and you've assembled the combo, so good job. However, if you want to get them Cragheart vibes, then I feel like you're probably going for Against All Odds instead. Okay, so here we are, level 9 finally. So Everlasting. On the next 4 sources of 4 or less damage you would suffer, negate the damage. So pretty interesting kind of tanking ability here. Just, it's 4 or less though, so it's not like a huge amount, but basically if a big enemy was to attack you, it's not really going to work, but it combos quite nicely with shield, right? Because if you have lots of shield, you're going to be reducing the value of damage anyway. And so hopefully you can get that damage number to 4 or below, and then you just negate it entirely. So the top of Everlasting is like an interesting kind of, it's an interesting angle of tanking where you kind of want it with shield, even though it seems like, oh, it negates damage, right? It's like, yes, but actually, really what you want to do is you want to use shield to be able to get that value down to that 4 or less, and then you can use Everlasting. And of course, it gives you a little bit of flexibility, maybe, of when it's going to trigger or not. You know, it's not always going to be every time you take damage or for the next 4, you know, straight away. But only being 4 charges versus 6 compared to all of the others is, you know, it is a drawback. It does mean that if you're playing at 4-player and you put this down, and for some reason you get like a very, very unlucky round, you may end up just blitzing through this and then it's gone. So yeah, I felt like as a level 9, it's a really interesting idea, and the way that it combos really well with shield is fun and interesting, but it ultimately might be a bit risky for a level 9 because you might it could get blown up and then it feels really bad. So like, it could be a card that doesn't hang around a lot. And I always feel like level 9 cards should really feel, or at least really high level cards, should really feel like so impactful and fun to play with, which is like we had Against All Odds previously, which is just like hey, you get to attack like everything, like really cool. Whereas, you know, Everlasting just feels like very kind of, you know, it's strong, but it's a little bit vanilla, and it could be risky, and it's not going to give the players like this amazing round. But I guess over the course of a scenario, it may give you some really good feelings if you're like a really big tanking fan. That's 96 initiative is, I mean, if you're playing this for the top, you don't really care about the initiative, but of course, that's a really good late initiative. The bottom is heal 3, range 3, regenerate and strengthen. So there's a strengthen on the bottom there. Not many ways to be able to do that. As we know, strengthen was kind of broken on bottom abilities for Gloomhaven, where you could essentially attack with advantage because of that strengthen that round, but then the strengthen wouldn't fall off until the next round. So then you would have 2 full rounds. Basically, you'd have another full round of being strengthened, which will allow you to do even more attacks. And this works so well on characters who also had bottom attack abilities as well. So yeah, so there is an option here. This could be quite good. Also, funnily enough, this actually combos quite nicely again with that level 7, with Like the Wind. You could heal yourself, strengthen, and you'd get a move 3 jump out of this. So suddenly, you know, you don't actually really need to be in the right spot. So I quite like that. I think it's fun. Again, if you're building this crazy combo at these later levels, I feel like the bottom of Everlasting might be a card you want to take a look at. So yeah, super decent start. Before applying any other bonuses, move the character token on one of your persistent abilities forward 1 slot to target 1. So potentially you can make this a target 2 as well. Really good if you've got somebody else who's going to benefit from the strengthen. And of course, somebody who's maybe a little bit low on health, you could chuck that regenerate on them and then they can kind of keep on going. So Everlasting is actually like, again, the top to me is... I say I'm not a huge fan of the tanking build of this character anyway. I just feel like I'm the kind of player who loves to run and hit things, and the tanking build is a little bit less of that. You can't use like crushing weight. You know, you kind of have to go for the shielding active abilities, and that is just a side, like, it's fine, but it just doesn't feel as fun, of course, as hitting things for big numbers. You know, I like to be big dumb drifter, hit big numbers. So yeah, but the bottom, really fun to play with like the wind. So definitely one for you combo players out there. Pick this card and then just start running around, strengthening yourself, hitting stuff. It's just, yeah, it's just stupid. Stupid fun. The other card is use every part, which is attack 4, range 4, and then heal 4. Target all allies adjacent to at least one enemy targeted with the attack ability. So again, it stipulates there to at least one target targeted with the attack ability. So potentially you could make this a target 2, and then potentially you could get even more healing out of it. It's a very interesting card. Like attack 4, range 4. It's kind of a bit boring, right? Kind of a little bit boring. But the yeah, like it's a little bit boring, I would say, in terms of what it does. But the raw numbers don't lie. You know, it's an attack 4. It will be an attack 5 with your precision aim. It will probably be a target 2 as well. And it's a big heal. So you can't deny that the raw values of it are not good, because they are. 18 initiative is also pretty decent for an early initiative. It's one of our earlier ones, actually. Move 3, attack X, where X is the number of hexes you moved during the move ability. So pretty nice melee ability here too. Move 3, potentially attack 3, crushing weight, attack 5. So use every part is also quite a nice ability to have here too. What I find a little bit frustrating about the Drifter in a way is you almost want 2 level 9s, 2 level 8s, you know, like they seem to have jammed a lot of like really fun stuff that really kind of opens your character up here at 8 and 9. And I haven't looked at all of the unlockable characters and all of their level 9s and things yet, so I can't really comment for sure. But my feeling is that they wanted to put really powerful abilities up at the top of the characters, but they didn't want you to get all of them. You know, you can't quite assemble kind of Megatron and get this kind of crazy combo. You can get elements of it, but you wouldn't necessarily get the perfect card here, right? Because if, for example, you want to play like the wind, you know, you might be thinking, well, both of these cards kind of work quite well with it. I mean, Everlasting is probably better, but also I'd probably really like to use every part too. So that there's elements here for both builds to want one of these two cards. If you're playing the ranged build, you may, you know, kind of want to get Strengthen, because Strengthen's really good. So, you know, you might just want to get it on the range build, but also you get a very, very solid attack card here. So, but you can only pick one. If you're playing the melee, if you're playing like the wind, you probably want the bottom of Everlasting, but it's going to be a bit, you know, that's an active choice. And then you give up the bottom of use every part, which is a move 3, potentially attack 3 or attack 5. So it's a really hard decision space, I think, to make a choice. Really, if you are playing the like the wind combo, I think I prefer Everlasting bottom. You know, if I had to pick, I'll be picking that because it's just more silly fun. You being able to regenerate and strengthen, it's just going to be funny, and you moving around and being able to do those attacks, super good. I think if you're playing if you're playing like a by the numbers type melee build, I think the bottom of use every part is probably better. Not to mention, to be honest, the top is just a good value attack regardless. So if you were in a situation when you just couldn't get to an enemy for some strange reason on the melee build, the top of use every part is just a reliable attack anyway. If you are playing the ranged build, then I think you probably do want to go with use every part for that top action. You can maybe make a slight argument for the bottom of Everlasting if you're playing the support build as well. You know, you're playing a bit more heavy into the support side of things, maybe you want it. And of course, if you're playing the tank build, you're going to want Everlasting. So that's where you're at with that. So those are the level 9s. I think that there's a lot of design space up at the top. As you see, like when we kind of got to like level 7, that was when things started to get kind of a little bit crazy with this character. And then suddenly we've got like the wind, which really opens up the character almost into like a new kind of play style almost, which is really neat. So I do kind of think that, although I think on my playthrough, I didn't play through all the way up, I think that there's a lot of fun to be had with high level Drifter play here for sure. Enhancements are an interesting thing to talk about for the Drifter because, well, if you're playing the Drifter from the start and it is your starting character that you're playing, the chances definitely are that you will not have enhancements available for this character. Enhancements are quite late into the game. I actually haven't found them yet in my playthrough so far. Maybe I just haven't gone to the right scenario or something. I don't know. It's a bit odd to me. But unlike in Gloomhaven, where there was a fairly quick kind of progression where you could get enhancements unlocked fairly early, and then your starting characters, you'd start to be able to use enhancements right away, and it would be a big part of the game. You know, I'm already 25 scenarios in and I don't have enhancements unlocked, and it doesn't look like I'm going to get them anytime soon unless I somehow randomly stumble into them. I don't know. So it's yeah, it's not something that I think I really want to talk about too much with any of these kind of character guides. Maybe a little bit more with the unlockables if there's something obvious. But the Drifter is just going to be increased numbers. So and also the rebalancing of enhancements in Frosthaven in general, with them not allowing you to just stick anything anywhere, is certainly going to give you much more limited opportunities. So you are probably going to really kind of understand quite clearly where enhancements should go and what enhancements should be. So, but increasing numbers is always a good thing with a Drifter. Drifter is numbers the class, so increasing those numbers always a good thing. Let's talk about perks on the Drifter. So for the Drifter, the first one is replace 1 -1 card with 1 +1 card. Great value get to be able to start to filter your deck a little bit and make sure that you're drawing more positives than negatives. So always very good. Big damage swing here. This is potentially a 2-point damage swing when you draw it, so very strong. Replace 1 -2 card with 1 +0 card, getting rid of that -2, that horrible feeling of drawing a -2, which especially at low levels can sometimes feel like a miss. So yeah, very good to get rid of that one so you can have a much more consistent draw from your deck. And also because the Drifter has very good attacks in general, you know, you're quite happy to attack for 0. That's actually fine a lot of the time for you. Replace 1 -1 card with 2 +0. Move one of your character token backwards to 1 slot cards. This is okay, I think, but you are kind of removing a plus damage to then kind of put in something that's less so, but it gives you the ability to track your kind of to move your tokens around a little bit more. I personally don't love this perk. I feel like it's probably just fine, but again, if you're good at managing your tokens, I don't really see you needing a perk like this to be able to do it. So actually all you're doing is sort of stealing damage away from yourself, and it could be very frustrating. It could lead to a point where you're like, I really just need to do a big attack, and you draw this, and it's like, yeah, it's a nice benefit, but if you want to win or you need to win, maybe not so great. So not a huge fan of that, but there may be some application if you wanted to go maybe for more of the range build, because the range build does tend to use more charges. So a situation like this, maybe with the ranged character, you might find that it'd be a little bit more useful if you burn through charges a lot. The next one is replace 2 +0 cards with 2 rolling PS3 cards. Very nice. It just gets rid of some of those +0s. Again, hopefully you'll start drawing plus damage rather than just flat. And rolling PS as well, also very useful to be able to get through. But you do also have dedicated cards that have PS already on them, so although sometimes this might flip and be quite nice, I feel like if you're going against an enemy that does have a high value shield, you're probably playing your attack PS cards anyway. Replace 2 +0 cards with 2 push 2 rolling cards. Again, quite nice. You can always decline the push, but again, it's getting rid of some of those, you know, just +0s that don't really do anything, you know. Not necessarily bad, not necessarily good. This isn't really a perk that you want to get early. You're definitely going to want to get rid of those minuses before you start getting rid of your +0s, because at level 1, you're probably pretty happy to draw a +0, but as you level up, obviously you want to try and improve that a little bit. So not too bad. There's plenty of good synergy and interaction with push in Frosthaven with unlockable classes, with some of the other starting classes as well. Lots of nice synergy with push. There are, I would say, on balance, less traps in Frosthaven than there were in Gloomhaven, just dotted around scenarios. But there's good reasons for that, I think, with the way that the scenarios have been designed and with some of the unlockable characters. They've kind of redressed the balance a little bit. But there's always going to be probably something you can do with a push in each scenario. So yeah, I quite like this one. Add 1 +3 card, so just 1 straight up +3 card. Obviously huge when you draw it, absolutely huge. If you have advantage and you can draw this, you know, you're laughing, but it doesn't really remove any. So again, this is more of a top end thing rather than a low end thing, I would suggest. Add 1 +2 immobilize card. Immobilize, very good, but obviously you might draw it against an enemy that doesn't really care about immobilize. So I guess it's so-so. I quite like this. I think it's fine. Would I prefer the +3 or would I the +2 with the Immobilize? I think they're very similar. Obviously, if you draw the Immobilize at the right time, it could be a bit better, but yeah, it's very similar in terms of what they're doing. And generally speaking, when things are very similar, unless something is like hard control, like disarm or stun, in this situation where it's maybe more soft control because you don't know if you're going to draw it against an enemy where it matters, I'd probably just go for the +3. Add 2 heal oneself rolling cards. Quite nice. These don't take up any space in your deck really because they're rolling, so that's quite good. Obviously you can keep rolling this and that can help you with continuous health. The problem with this is it may trigger your continuous health when you don't want it to trigger. So worth bearing in mind that some of these, although it seems quite nice, you might end up getting triggers and then it falling off, and you know, you might be trying to actually get it back. So for example, if I was to do an attack and then I was to draw this, then my continuous health would trigger, and even if that attack had moved back a token on it, I wouldn't, you know, it already has fallen off. So there could be, I can foresee some corner cases here where actually this could be damaging to you because you actually end up losing your continuous health. Ignore scenario effects and add 1 +1 card. Very good. There are lots of pretty nasty scenario effects in Frosthaven, similar to Gloomhaven, to be honest. I do generally recommend that people pick up this perk at some point. You know, you'll probably make a decision at some point whether or not you really want that perk, and you'll either get it when it matters, fairly early on, or you'll just ignore it and you won't get it. But it's nice here that you also get to add a +1 to your deck as well, so it's not just a very boring perk to get. Ignore negative item effects and add 1 +1 card. If you're playing the melee, I think you absolutely want this because you're going to be trying to wear some armor, I would suggest. So if you're playing melee build, definitely. If you're playing range build, probably less so. I don't think you necessarily need this because there's no ranged items that you want that would also give you negative modifiers. The next one is a 2 perk point, which is whenever you long rest, you may move one of your character tokens backward 1 slot. I actually quite like this one. I think out of these perks where you can have additional stuff that doesn't actually affect your attack modifier deck, I think this one may actually be the best one. Because just being able to just maybe even getting from your heal, if you've got continuous health, you're going to get a heal 4, you're going to use a charge, and then maybe you can just put that charge back. So it just stops you from maybe having that extra charge gone. And of course, it allows you that time a bit when you've got a bit of breathing room to maybe get an extra charge back on Crushing Way or something like that. But it also works well with the range build too, right? So it's not just a melee build thing. It actually works across any build that you're playing, really. I quite like it. It's just that in certain scenarios, you actually aren't going to be able to long rest because you're under so much pressure. So some of these ones that are like only when you long rest or only when you short rest, some of these types of perks, yeah, they're not going to come into play every single time. And if you think, said from a scenario perspective, Frosthaven is much more complex. Like every scenario is different, unique, throws challenges at you. I don't feel like you have that kind of that natural flow that you had in Gloomhaven, which was always clear a room, long rest, clear the next room, long rest, you know, try to clear the room, maybe don't, short rest, end. That kind of like flow of play. It doesn't really happen here in Frosthaven because the scenarios don't really give you that. So long resting is nice, but it's not actually able to be done as regularly or as frequently as you might have been able to do it in Gloomhaven, I've found. So yeah, this is still a good perk though, but it is 2 perk points when you could sink those points maybe into just improving your attack modifier deck. So, you know, worth maybe thinking about, although it is, you know, kind of nice and fun. The next one is you may bring 1 additional hand item into each scenario. That is really going to come down to what you've got available to you in the item shop. You might look down and think, yes, that's great. I mean, Crude Spear is a 2-handed item that I recommend when you're playing melee. So this would allow you to have another item as well on top of that, which could be quite useful. So this is going to come down to personal preference, and it's really going to come down to what's available to you in your item shop. At the end of each scenario, you may discard up to 2 loot cards, except random items, to draw that many new loot cards. So this has been changed, I believe, from the original. The original was that you could draw 2 cards and pick 1, I believe, every time you looted, which was like insanely powerful in terms of getting the loot that you wanted. This is less powerful, I think, but actually quite an interesting effect if you are digging for stuff. The problem is that I've found is that a lot of the materials in Frosthaven, sorry. A lot of the materials in Frosthaven are fairly interchangeable in the sense that you kind of need all of them. It's not often where you're like, oh, I don't really need that, but I need this. There are certain battle goals that you have sorry, not battle goals. There are certain personal quests that you have that may care about what loot cards you're getting. So that is something to consider. But I do feel like ultimately you just want everything. So, and because you can also kind of work the economy system in the outpost to be able to basically convert most material resources to 2 gold anyway, and then maybe you can buy a material resource with 2 gold once you get the camps. I feel like this perk will be pretty useful when you're first starting out, if you're not particularly great at looting and making sure that you kind of filter out your loot a little bit, but it will diminish over time, and you'll probably be looking back at like level 4, level 5 thinking, was that perk really worth it? You know, that's the kind of the way that I feel about this perk. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend it as a slam dunk one. It is fun, and if you are maybe struggling a little bit to get some loot that you want, then get it, but I would get it very early because I really don't think it would be a perk worth getting once you get to higher levels. So there we go. There's my guide on the Drifter, a character who I actually really grew to love and enjoy playing. I do think after a period of time, if you're a more experienced player, you kind of see all of the tricks that the character has. And after a period of time, apart from that level 7 point onwards where you get to do some new fun stuff potentially, but it does feel like after a while you kind of like you figure it out and it's not really too challenging after a certain point. And yeah, you kind of exhaust what the character can really do or show you fairly quickly. Compared to some of the other characters, I feel that the depth of this character is a little bit less, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's very good at what it does. It does it well. It's slick. It's easy to play. I think a lot of people will jump on this character and really enjoy it. And will have great success while playing it. So I enjoyed my time playing the Drifter, and I would probably play it again. I'd like to try a range build myself at some point because I can see that there's something there, but I do feel like the melee build feels like the natural fit for my own playstyle, but also for the character itself. It just feels like the right thing to do as that character. So yeah, that is the Drifter. Before we end the video, thank you again so much for all of my supporters over on Patreon and those over on Twitch. A big thank you to Mike Kira and Obi-Wan Kanzi for the legendary support. I really appreciate it, guys. Thank you both so much. Very kind of you. If you would like to support me, you can go over to patreon.com/mandatoryquest. You could come over to twitch.tv/mandatoryquest as well, where I stream. And we are streaming Frosthaven at the moment for the most part, but also some other things mixed in here and there too. I know that a lot of people are worried about spoilers, so might not be able to watch me play, but I have been playing through it there, and also my playthrough is here on YouTube as well. Okay, all this stuff for me to say on this. Thank you so much for watching. I will catch you in the next video. Bye.
I think so. Yeah.
Oh, that's the blessing from Cowboy. That's the blessing from.
Isaac, at this point, can we get your approval to add an additional attack modifier deck for allies in the digital?